My name is John Odom. I'm very proud to work for the Harris County Attorney, Mr. Vince Ryan, who I will introduce just in a moment. Biggest and main thing I want to say is a big thank you to all of you that are attending today. We had to cut off registration at 500. We've had certainly more than that who have gone to the website and wanted to register, but we did not want to be in a position that we would not have room for everyone. Obviously, we're not completely full, but I would anticipate with the traffic and with parking that people will come in. Again, thank you very much for being here. We've got a very full program. The other thing that's very amazing to me is that we put this together in about 3 weeks, and the 500 of you that signed up for it had no idea what the program was other than just what was put out on the information, did not know even who the specific points to be covered were, much less who the speakers were. We have between 20 and 25 speakers for you today. Consequently, my main job is to see the trains run on time and we stay on time. And in that regard, let me make some housekeeping notices before I turn it over to Mr. Ryan. Number one, there will be no breaks in terms of a break time. You're on your own for breaks. The reason for that is so you get a full 4 hours CLE credit. I found out if you take out 10 or 15 minutes for a break time, Judge, then that docks you on your CLE time. I figured it would be better to let everybody find the restroom on their own rather than put 500 people out in the hallway at one time. There are restrooms right across the hall with signs there. There's other restrooms to your right and down the hall, so breaks are on your own. Number two, the food has been provided very graciously by two of our sponsors. Number one, Vidal Martinez, and the other one comes to mind, shouted out to me, Mr. Say again? FosterQuan? No, not on the food. It was Jacob Monte. Jacob, if you're here, thank you, these people, thank you. Not only do you have the food and the water and the soft drinks out front, but bring those into the auditorium if you want to. Now I'd like to introduce the Harris County Attorney. I think my good friend Dr. Lawrence Payne, who is here, wrote a book, talks about the, quote, servant leader. And I think that Vince Ryan epitomizes a servant leader. He has been in public service in the United States Army on active duty in Vietnam, Europe, Central America. Obviously, in the United States, served as Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve. He's also served on the City Council. He served as an assistant county attorney. He jokes in the office that he became first assistant county attorney, and it took him a long time to rise to the ranks of the county attorney. But I'm proud to work under Vince. My job is in the area of children's protective services, and I'm very pleased to work with many lawyers in that area as well as support staff, many of whom are today. Please help me welcome Harris County Attorney Vince Ryan.
Well, let me echo what John just said. Thank you for coming here today and showing an interest in this very, very important subject and topic. Let me start off by saying John Odom and Terry O'Rourke. Terry, where are you in the audience? In the back. Terry and John came to me with this idea a little bit over 3 weeks ago, and they have been working tirelessly with other people in our office, in county government, and other governmental units to put this thing together as a step to educate each of us about the plights of these thousands of children who are coming, and to arm the attorneys in the room with at least some of the basic resources they need to know, especially if they want to step forward and help some of these unaccompanied children. We have representatives who are going to speak, as John indicated, from the various aspects of county government. And again, we have a full house who has RSVP'd. There are some empty seats now, but we anticipate people coming and going throughout this next half a day. So do not hesitate, as John said, if you need to get up and go make a phone call, check something, go get something to eat, don't hesitate to do so and come back in to the room, because every bit of the information today can be of use to you if you're an attorney and are interested maybe in volunteering, and if you're a non-attorney in knowing all the different parameters about what's going on with these unaccompanied children. And with that, let me now turn the stage over to Justice Ava Guzman, who is the chair of the Judicial Commission for Children. Judge?
Good afternoon. I'm Eva Guzman. I have the privilege of serving Texans on the Supreme Court of Texas as chair of the Court's Commission for Children, Youth, and Families, and also liaison to the Court's Access to Justice Commission. I am especially grateful for the leadership and the collaboration of the many individuals, bar associations, and other organizations that together have worked to make this seminar possible, or this conference, and particularly the Harris County Attorney's Office, and of course John Odom, who we talked several times before today. In a few moments, you will hear via video from the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, Nathan Hecht. In his remarks, Chief Justice Hecht eloquently underscores the importance of participation by the bar in addressing the legal needs of the underserved in our community. Many across our state, and many of you in this room, and I know because I've seen the work that you do, are already working tirelessly to address the needs of the approximately 30,000 children who on any given day are part of our state's foster care system. It was also good to see that our commissioner, Judge John Specia, is here today. Dedication to children is part of his DNA. I've known him over 25 years, and it's always been that way. And so thank you, Judge Specia, for all that you do. I know that you know the plight of our children well. Texas lawyers also devote thousands of hours to serve the legal needs of almost 6 million Texans that live at or below the poverty level. And so it is up to the lawyers and the judges to now respond to what the law demands regarding the crisis at hand. We can all agree that children are the most vulnerable among us. But our courts and you as members of the bar have a unique role in a responsibility to ensure that our laws are applied equally to all people, especially our children, and that the rule of law continues to serve as a cornerstone of our system of justice. In closing, the words of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell make abundantly clear that justice in our America must be for all. He said, "Equal justice under law is not merely a caption on the facade of the Supreme Court building. It is perhaps the most inspiring ideal of our society. It is one of the ends for which our entire legal system exists. It is fundamental that justice should be the same in substance and availability without regard to economic status." And with that, it is now my privilege to present the remarks of Chief Justice Nathan Hecht, a jurist who has long demonstrated his commitment to access to justice. Thank you very much.
I'm Nathan Hecht, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas. In the last few months, unaccompanied children from Central America have been streaming across our country's southwestern border in record numbers. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security reports that the total from last October through June is 57,525, more than twice the number during the same period the year before. Along the Rio Grande, the rate of such crossings by unaccompanied children is nearly 3 times that of the year before. Media reports, videos, and commentators on this phenomenon have stirred deep, strong reactions among Americans throughout the country. In the most recent Gallup poll, concern over immigration and illegal entries has risen overnight to become, in the minds of a plurality of Americans, the most important issue the country faces. For Texans, the concerns are on our very doorstep. Many people believe the flow across the border must be stopped, and Governor Perry has taken bold steps to do that. Others disagree. The courts cannot take sides in the dramatic political, social, and humanitarian aspects of the crisis. Our job is to guarantee that the laws will be applied equally, fairly, and efficiently to all alike. The system works best when everyone has a lawyer. Unfortunately, many whose need is greatest cannot afford legal fees. For decades, the Supreme Court of Texas has worked hard to encourage Texas lawyers to represent pro bono for free those who cannot afford to pay, and to secure support for legal aid providers who offer basic civil legal services to the poor. Every year, Texas lawyers give millions of hours in free time worth hundreds of millions of dollars to provide civil legal services to Texas' most vulnerable people. Every year, legal aid providers help more than 100,000 families. The beneficiaries are our veterans, the elderly, children, and many others. For lawyers, this is not charity or a government program. It's professionalism. It's being a lawyer. Until recently, Texas courts have assumed that most of the legal issues for these unaccompanied children would be addressed in the federal courts. Now we find that many cases will be heard in state courts first. Our hard-working state courts are already very busy. The burden of many additional cases may be too much without additional resources. Pro bono lawyers' assistance in assuring that every child's rights are understood and fairly determined not only benefits their clients, but eases the burden on the courts and the public. This course on the rights and duties of children and the government here at Houston Community College is designed to help provide you, as legal and law enforcement professionals, with the skills and direction to assist in the problem that confronts us now. I am grateful to you for your time and interest, and as Chief Justice, I am proud to lead a bar that is so dedicated to professionalism. I hope that your involvement in the problem before us will inspire you to continue pro bono representation throughout your careers. May your efforts go far in upholding the integrity of the rule of law and ensuring, in the closing words of the Pledge of Allegiance, justice for all.
Hey, so eloquent. I've got to share with you that Terry O'Rourke and I went to Austin last Friday, 6 days ago, went to the chambers as Chief Justice, told him we were putting together here. And we said, we want you. That was Friday. He said, I cannot make it on Thursday. He taped on Monday, and it shows the dedication, I believe, that our Chief Justice has to this, that he turned it around and provided this so quickly. And thank you very much, Justice Guzman, for being with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you a neighbor just to the south of us, the President of the State Bar of Texas, Mr. Trey Apffel. Trey.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here on behalf of the State Bar of Texas, and it's very important that I be here. First of all, I want to say congratulations. Congratulations to you for being here, because you share the same beliefs as one of our former presidents, Lyndon Johnson. This year is the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And during President Johnson's efforts to see that through, he said, if our will is strong, if our hearts are right, and courage remains our constant companion, we shall overcome. And that is exactly the mindset of the people in this room. That is exactly the mindset of the lawyers of the state of Texas. History tells us time and time again in times of crisis, the lawyers of Texas are quick to step up to meet the legal needs of those who don't have access to or can't afford legal services. As Justice Hecht and Justice Guzman have told us, having assistance in this process from lawyers from the legal profession will not only provide legal services to the individual unaccompanied minors, but it will also aid and assist the courts in an orderly process of seeing that these children are afforded due process and ensuring that our rule of law and the integrity of that rule of law is maintained. It is the oath we take in this profession, and it is the right to access to justice that we defend every day that makes our profession different from any other in this country. And as Chief Justice Heck said, this is not showmanship. We don't do this for publicity, and we darn sure don't do it for money. We do it because we take an oath. We do it because it's right. The State Bar has formulated and put together a website, texasbar.com/volunteer. And there you will be able to access information about efforts statewide and all organizations who are taking part in this process and in this effort, so that you or any other lawyer can identify an area, can identify an organization, can identify a need, and you will be able to have access to that and then go there and help. The State Bar will utilize our wide array of communications tools and resources so that the attorneys of Texas have every opportunity that they need to get the training necessary in order to help these minors. We will continue to work side by side with the Supreme Court, with the Texas Access to Justice Commission, with the Hispanic Issues section of the State Bar and Mr. Benny Augusto, our 47 sections and our 250 local bar associations as we see this effort through. I want to thank Vince Ryan and John Odom for allowing us to be a part of this program. We will stand at the ready to help Texans and Americans every step of the way. Thank you very much and have a great meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce a local Houston lawyer, a dear friend of mine for many years, Mr. Benny Augusto. Benny is the chair of the Hispanic Issues section of the State Bar of Texas. He's first vice president of the Houston Bar Association. He's passionate about these issues. We've been on the phone, I think, Benny, about 24/7 for the last 3 weeks or so. Please help me welcome my friend and yours, Mr. Benny Augusto. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Benny Augusto. I'm a proud Houston lawyer, but I am here also as the first vice president of the Houston Bar Association and as a representative of the Hispanic, Latino, and Latina lawyers of Texas and United States. We here today all should be proud because you know what you show? You are showing Texas and the world the spirit of Texas, this giving, loving spirit of Texas. And as Houston lawyers and members of the Houston community, we have come together today to be prepared. It's called emergency preparedness, I think we have called it sometimes, because we don't know if 1,000 or 10,000 boys and girls are coming to Houston and Harris County. And through the great work of Vince Ryan and his staff and all these members of our Texas community, we've come together. From the judges to the county workers and staff, all of us have come together to say to the community, Houston lawyers are stepping up. We're stepping up as we did in Katrina and Rita. We're stepping up when there's natural disasters. We're stepping up when things happen that maybe aren't that good. And a lot of people don't like having 1,000 or 10,000 folks from Central America in our midst. Some people don't like that. But what are we doing? As Houston lawyers, we are preparing for that emergency or for that problem, because we have two goals at the Houston Bar Association: to team up with the county and with the state and with the federal government in every way we can to have prepared lawyers to assist these young folks to have access to justice. Imagine a 10-year-old girl stepping up in front of a federal magistrate or a federal judge without representation. The government is represented, the judge is there, and the child is called up for her case on deportation proceedings. Access to justice through legal, humane representation is what we're here to learn about so we can assist. And then let the rule of law govern and let the rule of law pass through. If deportation is what's needed, we will be there to assist in a humane, legal way to get that done. If it's integration with family members here in town, we will also assist. So the Houston Bar, almost 12,000 strong of the 20,000 lawyers in the greater Houston area, we're here to tell you we will assist you in every way we can. We will also have the State Bar website linked with ours. We will also have this seminar there to help everyone that is willing to learn and assist. Thank you so much. I congratulate you on behalf of the Houston Bar and all the volunteer lawyers of Texas that are willing to step up. Thank you very much.
Dr. Adriana Tamis, if I'm saying that correctly, trustee, Houston Community College, is a good doctor with us today. Vidal, you...
She's with us. She's on Luke 610.
A representative, the general counsel for Houston Community College. I'm going to call upon you because of that position right now, and you say no? He didn't take the bait. When she comes in, she will speak. Let me emphasize before we go to the next part with Univision, one thing that Benny said. All the materials that will be referred to will be posted on the Harris County Attorney website and be available to you. We thought in this day of technology, rather than print up a bunch of paper you have your heads in here, that you can go to it on the website. The other thing about the website, as soon as we can, we will have this full proceeding taped. It'll be made available on our website, and as Benny just said, and Trey alluded to, it'll be available through the State Bar of Texas, the Houston Bar, and will be available for CLE credit for the many that could not attend. It's now my pleasure to go, and we're right on time, to Mr. Raul Pingbert, if I'm saying that correctly. Mr. Pingbert is anchor on Univision. I think it's very appropriate to put a face, literally, on the issue rather than just talk about the law. Raul, would you come up, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, in the past few months, more than 57,000 children coming from Mexico, and especially from Central America, have illegally crossed the border of the United States without an adult. This phenomenon, few times seen in these and other countries, forces specialists from diverse fields of study to look at and analyze the cause and effects of this great problem. My name is Raul Pingbert, news anchor and executive manager, editor of Univision Houston, and senior correspondent for affiliate stations. And on behalf of Univision, I welcome you to this event. We especially thank Harris County Attorney Vince Ryan for this initiative, but also thank all of you, the participants, that are deeply concerned about this migrant phenomenon that has legal, economic, and social consequences. Univision has established clear editorial policies that closely follows this migration problem and giving special attention to the human rights of these children that for so many different reasons have arrived to our border. In these past months, I've had the opportunity to visit this so-called ground zero, or region that these underage immigrants have walked through, and it's difficult to describe the bad condition in which they arrive, and also the enormous legal challenges they generate to this country. Univision joins this initiative and thanks the authorities of Harris County for their interest in analyzing this legal situation and protecting the human rights of these young children. We wish you lots of success in this seminar that starts today, and on behalf of Univision, thank you so much. And now, I would like to present this video. It's in Spanish with subtitles in English, who tried to explain the actual situation in the border and the origin of this phenomenon in Mexico and in Central America. Thank you so much.
Estados Unidos vive hoy en día una de las peores crisis humanitarias en su historia contemporánea. Y estados como Texas se han convertido en la zona cero del cruce ilegal de miles de niños y jóvenes de México y especialmente de Centroamérica que solos están cruzando por esta frontera. Las cifras son alarmantes. En el año 2011 se registraron en promedio 4.000 detenciones de menores de edad. En el año 2012 fueron casi 9.000 niños y jóvenes detenidos. En el año 2013, la cifra se duplicó y fueron detenidos casi 20.000 menores. Pero la situación se desbordó en este 2014. Hasta hoy, más de 57.000 niños han sido detenidos por agentes de la patrulla fronteriza o fuerzas de seguridad de Texas que los entregan a autoridades federales.
En el último mes vimos un aumento de casi el 90%, en su mayoría son niños, muchos de ellos ahora también son niñas y también niños menores de 13 años, así que es una población bastante vulnerable.
Esa llamada crisis humanitaria desbordó la capacidad de instancias federales como la patrulla fronteriza. Sus centros de detención están muy por encima de su capacidad. La atención para los menores no es la adecuada y muchos agentes, en lugar de patrullar la frontera, se dedican a cuidar niños.
Las condiciones realmente en las que están los niños son para nada adecuados para ellos.
Pero también los gobiernos locales como McAllen, Brownsville, Harlingen y muchos otros fueron sobrepasados. Los costos para el estado de Texas han sido enormes y funcionarios como el gobernador de Texas, Rick Perry, pide al gobierno federal el reembolso de estos gastos y la deportación inmediata de los menores detenidos.
We have what I consider to be an untenable situation on our hands in Texas and in turn for this country.
Otros políticos, como el representante demócrata de Texas, Henry Cuellar, ha propuesto leyes para agilizar la deportación de los menores con más jueces migratorios en la frontera. Ello haría más rápido el trámite migratorio sin violar, dice, derechos de los menores.
Ese es algo que el presidente Obama, el presidente de los Estados Unidos, un demócrata, pidió el 30 de junio.
Pero ante esta realidad, habría que detenerse en el origen del problema. Sin duda, el factor económico sigue siendo un imán para miles de inmigrantes que viven en la miseria y la falta de oportunidades en sus países de origen. También la reunificación es una causa. Miles de niños cruzan ilegalmente la frontera de Estados Unidos buscando a sus padres que llegaron antes que ellos. Y más recientemente, el fenómeno de la violencia generada por pandillas y cárteles del narcotráfico ha obligado a muchos a huir de sus poblaciones y buscar refugio en Estados Unidos. Y por último, las campañas de desinformación de los traficantes de humanos que hacen en Centroamérica, garantizando a sus víctimas un estatus legal al pisar suelo norteamericano. Esto último podría ser la principal razón que detonó en los últimos meses este flujo masivo de inmigrantes menores de edad y que ha generado miles de millones de dólares en ganancias al crimen organizado. Mientras tanto, el presidente Barack Obama ha solicitado fondos especiales por 3.700 millones de dólares para atender este problema, pero a pocos días del receso legislativo parece difícil lograrlo. Obama también ha convocado a los presidentes de Honduras, El Salvador y Guatemala a actuar para evitar este flujo y sus representantes diplomáticos ya están en la zona. Mientras tanto, el problema sigue latente en la frontera y más niños siguen llegando. Números conservadores indican que al finalizar este 2014, casi 90.000 menores habrán llegado a Estados Unidos.
And this is the situation right now in the southern frontier. Thank you so much for your patience and your attention. Thank you.
Right off the 610 loop, trustee, Houston Community College, Dr. Adriana Temez. Thank you for being with us, our host.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Thank you so much to the Houston Bar Association, the County Attorney's Office, and all the other organizations that make today possible. We are honored and excited that this event is taking place here at the Houston Community College system. What an incredible learning opportunity for our students. The Houston Community College is in the business of educating all students. It's in the business of making sure that we're preparing the leaders of tomorrow. And for our students to be exposed to the dialogue that will be taking place here today is an incredible opportunity. So thank you. And I also am honored to be here and to be part of this dialogue because this particular issue is one that is very important and a critical one that we need to talk about. So this is an incredible gathering of the minds. Thank you and welcome to the Houston Community College system. Have a great day. Thank you.
I appreciate the fact some people referred to Terry and I helped put this together. As you can imagine, any effort like this takes many people, and I would like to recognize those as groups to save the time and attention of our elected officials and of the planning committee that we have, and also the others that have been involved in this organization. These, and they're listed on your program, are the various organizations that are co-sponsoring this event. Special thanks on the Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Adrian Garcia, and I won't start naming them all off. You have a list, you have the logos at the bottom of the page, but thank you to all the co-sponsors that we have that are there, many of whom are represented in the audience with us today. Next, our planning committee. I just kind of assembled who does this, who does that. I think there's about 26 names on there. I'm not going to start calling out this one or that one. I feel like this is the Academy Awards and I start naming my aunts and uncles. But you can see the names up there. You probably know everyone that is on there. They've all been very active in the planning of this, and it would not have happened without this planning committee working tirelessly, literally over the past 3 weeks. Next. We have a number of elected officials, some of whom are with us today, and particularly, and I'm not sure who all is with us. I think I saw State Representative Ana Hernandez come in, State Representative Wally come in, Judge David Fraga is here. I know Judge Rodriguez is here, Justice Guzman. Are there any other elected officials with us? Sheriff Garcia will be on the program. Thank you again to the elected officials. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce the gentleman who helped mainstay and put this together, a friend of mine for many years, and many of you know him either by reputation or personally, Mr. Charles Foster, to give us an overview very briefly. Charles has a very distinguished career. Charles, come on up as we go through a brief resume. Board certified immigration attorney, chairman of the task force on immigration for the Greater Houston Partnership. He's honorary consul for the Kingdom of Thailand. Many honors he's received. He's been an immigration lawyer and advisor to President George Herbert Walker Bush, to George W. Bush, to, I know, Governor Mark White, to President Bush, George W. when he was both governor as well as President of the United States, and the list goes on and on. Charles has been outstanding in terms of getting the private sector attorneys involved in this program, and I'd like for him to give us an overview of the legal aspects and also of the social issues we're talking about here. Charles Foster, please.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here. And I think it's been said, but looking out, I can tell. I think this is one of the largest or the largest HBA-sponsored CLE program, one of the largest or the largest in the state of Texas. This really is amazing. When John and Terry O'Rourke sort of lassoed me into this just really a couple of weeks ago, one of the first things I said is there's no way we could do this in 2 weeks. We won't have anybody show up, and look at all of you. So you need to applaud yourselves for showing up. So I want to thank the leadership of Vince Ryan and again particularly John Odom, who's been at this day and night, and right along with Vince, with Terry O'Rourke right behind him in this. So thank you very much. What we're about, has been said by those speakers, is the most basic responsibility of attorneys, and that is protecting the rights of those individuals that need legal representation. And it has been said, no individual needs it more than a minor, than a young child. As Benny said, you can just picture a young child in a removal proceeding before a judge without legal representation. By law, technically, the government, because this is civil, not criminal, is not required to provide legal representation. So a lot of this will be up to the private bar. Think of this minor also as being a stranger, having just gotten here, knowing no one, not even speaking the language, maybe having suffered both emotional and physical trauma, and even the loss of loved ones on the way to get here. So you could not have imagined a client that needed more assistance. By the way, these individuals, you would not always know this by reading the press, are not criminals. There's an argument that they're not even technically illegal under the terms of which they entered the United States. They didn't flee. They surrendered themselves at the border for the most part. And nor are we having an immigration invasion. The overall numbers, in spite of the dramatic increase in children, the overall numbers are dramatically very, very low. You have to go back to '73. Some of us can remember that. I grew up in the Valley to find numbers this low. And recently, actually, the numbers have been decreasing, even in terms of the unaccompanied minors. Now, to put this in perspective, as shown in the wonderful Univision video, there are push factors, what we call push factors and pull factors, that have brought about this relatively unexpected development. The big push factors, of course, the poverty levels in the sending countries, and mostly the incredible crime rates, unusual crime rates in that they disproportionately affect young people. A lot of that crime and the dysfunction in those societies and the sending countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, and Honduras go back to the 80s, back to the civil wars that broke out as part of the proxy code wars that were going on between the United States and the Soviet Union. And of course, the spillover of violence, as was referred to, from the drug wars in Colombia and Mexico. So there are reasons why there's an unusual level of violence in those countries. And as was indicated in the video, there's a huge pull factor. A vast majority of these children, unaccompanied children, are not coming here just because they're coming here hoping to make it as a 4-year-old or as an 8-year-old on their own. They're actually coming here because they have a mother or father or breadwinner here in the United States. That's part of our policy, family reunification. They're trying to reunite with their parents, and the parent has provided the funding or the encouragement in part to bring them here. Now, frankly, if Congress had passed comprehensive immigration reform or any form of it, we would not be in this predicament today. There would have been a legal route by which these children could have come in. They could have afforded to fly in probably first class on United rather than having to come under these horrendous conditions that you've read about. It's also interesting to note, as referred to, that this is also one of the push factors are the professional smuggling organizations which are affiliated with cartels. Precisely because our border has become far more secure, it's been bad for business. It's hard to get people across the border. They can lose money if they cannot get people across the border. So the cartel, because it has been, the cartels and professional organizations have discovered that they can actually make more money and encourage through, if you will, misleading representations about what happens when you get here. The fact that they can bring kids up here and just leave them at the border and they can more or less cross on their own because they're not trying to evade anyone and they're surrendering themselves once they get here. So that's been one of the reasons as well that has resulted in this. Effectively, because we do not have an effective legal system, we've outsourced both our temporary workers program and family reunification programs to organized crime. Now today, we, as John illustrated, we have a great planning committee that put together a group of really knowledgeable, substantive speakers, and I want to particularly thank R.J. Hazeltine-Shedd of Vince Ryan's office, who particularly worked hard to get these speakers. You will note as they're introduced that a large number come from the nonprofit sector, and that's not surprising. Groups like Catholic Charities, the Tahrir Justice Center, the YMCA, and the immigration law clinics at U of H Law Center, South Texas College of Law, Thurgood Marshall School of Law. They have been working in this area with unaccompanied minors for years, so they have more so than the private bar for obvious reasons, and they've developed a great deal of expertise, and you will see them well represented in this program. Now, the major law that has been sort of taken advantage of, if you will, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, which, by the way, was passed unanimously by the U.S. Senate, passed almost unanimously by the House except for 2 votes. Rarely do you have a piece of legislation like that passed, signed by President George W. Bush. I always say the greatest president on immigration is a very low bar because very few presidents actually have paid attention to this issue. It's in that framework of that legislation that gives these children from Central America, countries other than Mexico, special rights, a special opportunity to see if they have rights under the laws, if they have the right of asylum, if they're subject to abuse. Now, the law provides them with that opportunity to seek these affirmative reliefs from deportation. They're subject to deportation because they do not have a full legal status when they get here in the U.S. So the question is, what form of discretionary relief may be eligible to those individuals? But those rights are hollowed, again, without competent, enthusiastic, volunteer, pro bono legal representation. Now, the importance of that is shown by some remarkable statistics. Statistics show, according to a recent study conducted by Syracuse University, that unaccompanied minors, unrepresented, are deported in 9 out of 10 cases. 9 out of 10 cases. On the other hand, the statistics flip. When represented, fully 50% achieve one form of relief from deportation or the other. And another study show that if represented, fully 60% of represented children would have one form of relief or the other. So your participation, what you're doing, is critical in this area of law. Now, it is what we're going to talk about today is affirmative relief. We're going to talk about the right of asylum, whether or not as females they're eligible for any relief under the Violence Against Women's Act, whether or not some are children, because some of them will have one or more parents that made it here and actually became citizens, and I said whether or not they're citizens, because if they have a parent born in the U.S. that lived here long enough, that child could be a derivative U.S. citizen without even knowing it. And finally, whether or not they're entitled to any protection under a T visa, U visa. You'll hear more about that as a victim of trafficking, or whether they're a cooperating witness in a criminal investigation. And finally, whether or not the court will, through a special court proceeding, it will be determined that they have other relief under the law and will be granted what we call special immigrant juvenile status. Now, we've lined up an outstanding group of speakers. You will meet them. They're going to speak about those substantive areas that I've just outlined, the ethical implications, the importance of being bilingual. We're not all bilingual, but that's important too, because your client is speaking Spanish. And I finally want to conclude by thanking all of the speakers that have lined up, and most important, thanking you for all being here in this, I think, truly historic CLE program. Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Charles Foster. Before I get to the next panel, I know we've had many people come in as the program has progressed. Let me remind a couple of points. Number one, there are no official breaks. You're on your own for restroom breaks. The restrooms are across the hall and down the hall to the right. Number two, the food is being made available to you, as I said earlier, by Mr. Vidal Martinez Law Firm and brain freeze. Vidal? Jacob Monte. Jacob Monte. Food, drinks, and you can also bring the food and drink in here. I do want to single out, we have an outstanding planning committee, but right hand, left hand for me has been executive assistant in our office, Jackie Terrell, that has worked tirelessly on putting together this program. I think since emails out 24 hours a day. Kristen Lee has helped greatly on communications, and Bob Snyder has been doing our production. This went up through the Houston Bar, and only recently did it even go out to all the lawyers in Houston that are not members of the Houston Bar Association. Lastly, I want to commend Constable Rosen for providing security and traffic control along with the staff and the security here at Houston Community College. Going on to our next part, federal, state, and local government. I've been in touch with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and just for scheduling purposes, and the staff that they have simply could not. I talked to what I'll shorthand refer, and you'll hear referred to several times today, is the ORR, sometimes referred to as CPS. As Vince Ryan referred to in our office and in all, we have attorneys that handle CPS cases. Our client, when we go into court, is the agency, DFPS, that Commissioner Specia heads up, and we're so pleased that he took time out of his busy schedule to be here. One of our CPS attorneys, Ms. Francia Gary, is moderator for this panel. To keep things moving along, we're right on time. This panel will come up at 1:50. In addition to Commissioner Specia, C.J. Broussard-White is seated in the middle of the table, and immediately to Commissioner Specia's right is Pamela Parker from Austin with the executive staff. They will talk to you about the roles of the federal government with respect to these unaccompanied children, the role of the state government, and also of local government. We also have represented on the stage the Harris County Sheriff, Mr. Adrian Garcia, who will talk about the local government role, but particularly law enforcement aspects. Finally, let me say, and I told the speakers as they put this program together, this is not about politics. This is about what the law is, as the Chief Justice said. This is the law. I've told the speaker time and again, I don't care what your political views are. The audience is not interested in what your political views are. We're here to talk about the realities of what we face and what the law is that applies. I'm going to turn the program over to a man who's very dedicated to this, former state district judge in San Antonio, Texas. He's a jurist in residence with the Texas Children's Commission, Commissioner John Specia. Commissioner.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Actually, we talked about turning it over to the sheriff first, so I'm going to let the sheriff start, and then we'll jump in after it.
That'll get you out of a speeding ticket. First of all, I want to once again thank the county attorney for organizing all of these brilliant minds, legal minds, on this very, very complicated issue. And I also want to take a second to recognize my staff. Where's Alan Bernstein, that is helping to coordinate a great deal of our efforts, my government relations person, Ryan Sullivan, and Parisa Safarsadeh. The reason I'm part of this panel is because I have, number one, on my side of the world, have been working to organize some of the federal authorities, law enforcement authorities, some of the federal agencies, and many of the local social service agencies to make sure that we are all making the appropriate plans to contend with this issue. When I was on Houston City Council, I worked with Mayor Bill White during similar challenges when we were working with our neighbors in Louisiana during the times of Katrina and Rita. So we're under a similar circumstance. But at the bottom line of it is that I had the opportunity to be on a plane recently on my way to Washington at an invite by the Vice President to talk about this similar issue. And the stewardess made me aware that there was 3 kids on the plane that seemed to be from El Salvador and were alone. And so as I did a little investigation up in the sky, sure enough, I found these kids. They were from El Salvador. They were tiny, tiny little critters. And come to find out that they weren't alone, but they were with someone with the Office of Refugee and Relocation, a caseworker of some sort. That experience made me realize, as we started talking to other people and started to hear much more discussion about the challenges that are occurring in South Texas, that we really don't know what it is that we're looking for in terms of, documentation and how the agencies are passing off individuals and relocating families and things of that nature. So in that process in the airplane, I asked for documentation if this person was a legitimate representative of the Office of Refugee and Relocation. She presented some documentations. I looked at it. It was all Xerox or black and white printed materials. So one of the things that we're also working to do in a similar vein is to make sure that we are providing some local law enforcement training so that in the event that an agency in the Harris County area is to get a call, as I foresee could likely happen in the future, and there's maybe someone claiming to have more appropriate custody of a child than the other person, and you know how those particular environments occur. We're working to make sure that our law enforcement personnel are trained to understand what kind of documents we ought to be looking at, how do we validate them. Our call centers need to have a 24/7 number to verify or communicate and share information, validate information. But also, we need to prepare our personnel to know how to manage this circumstance in the event that we start to get those disturbance calls or domestic, those family disturbance calls as we typically tend to get. This is so important because we want to make sure that our folks are making the most appropriate decisions. We've heard some discussions in some of the meetings that I've had that let me know that there are some challenges looming in front of us. Some of those examples are that some of the families are happy to help, but they're realizing that, you know what, I agreed to help for a day or two, not for 3 weeks or a month or 6 months. And that's going to cause particular stresses and challenges out in the community, and we need to be able to be prepared to respond to that. Secondly, I want to put a couple of things in front of you. And before I forget, as I look at some documentation I have in front of me, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee has been very, very helpful on this issue. And she wanted to make sure you were aware. And where is Yvonne Sanchez, her representative? Yvonne has some information that the Congresswoman is making available. This is some literature that she's putting out on the table, and he can help to coordinate with her. But she has been very helpful and wants to make sure that you get this information. To that end, there's been this discussion about gangs and gang affiliation and gang membership and that kind of stuff. The 3 kids I saw on the plane, I didn't see any weapons strapped on their bodies. I didn't see spider webs tattooed, on their necks or on their arms. What I saw was about a 4-year-old, about a 5-year-old, and about an 8-year-old. I've been to Guatemala. I have seen what folks are up against, and I understand very completely and very clearly why people are making some decisions that they're making. But I am also coordinating with the Central American consulates and the Mexican consulate to create a unified voice from this area to families who may be making strategic decisions about bringing their children into this country. And that is that the journey is dangerous. The president has said something that hit me pretty strongly, and that is that we can measure the kids making it to the border, but we don't know how many kids are disappearing in the middle of the process. And so I have a mobile phone app that the Sheriff's Office has implemented several years ago. It's called I Watch Harris County. I want to share that with you in the event that you come across something that is of important. I believe that you will get some degree of intelligence, some degree of information about people trying to exploit these kids, maybe individuals who are actually smuggling or trafficking in them. I ask you to please share that with me so that we can deal with those folks appropriately. But also to share with you that that app is also being made available in Central America and in Mexico, so that we can try to put some good information in the hands of our federal partners down in those territories, and as well as have a clear picture as to what's occurring so that we can more effectively and accurately understand those things that are occurring. I'm proud of the fact that I just came back from the Texas Sheriff's Conference, and the sheriffs are pretty adamant about wanting to be a part of the solution, and they're pretty upset that they haven't been included. But I want to tell you how proud I am of you for your willingness to step forward and help these individuals, these children who need incredible help, and lending your legal expertise to this incredible phenomena. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conference. Thank you.
We're going to give you a fairly high-level overview of the state's involvement. We've been involved since the beginning. When you saw those stats, we've been in communication when it was 4,000 children. So today it's a matter of degree, but the state of Texas, Department of Health and Human Services, HHSC has been working with this matter for the last 4 or 5 years. The current surge in immigrant children is a federal response primarily, taking place here in Texas and all around the country. The state of Texas Health and Human Service agencies are engaged in the response through primarily a public health approach with my agency, Child Care Licensing, and potentially Child Protective Services in the future. The focus of the Department of Family and Protective Services is and always will be on child safety. And so there's no real difference in this surge. If there's an issue involving child safety, we could be involved. Specifically, really our biggest involvement right now has been through my Child Care Licensing Division, which is responsible for licensing and oversight of all facilities that take care of children in the state of Texas. That includes the facilities and placing agencies working with the Office of Refugee Resettlement to house and place the unaccompanied minors. They have worked to expand capacity, and as they have worked to expand capacity, we have quickly responded to questions about current and proposed facilities. We've granted certain variances to allow them to increase the number of children they can care for, as long as safety is not compromised. The licensing division is also responsible for any standard violations, abuse and neglect in all licensed facilities, and so as an ongoing part of our business, if there is an allegation of abuse and neglect in a facility, we will investigate that. But you need to also understand, because I'm trying to give you context, there are some shelters used by ORR that are not licensed by the Department of Family and Protective Services. They are located on the Department of Defense facilities, and the best example of that is the one that is located at Lackland Air Force Base with a capacity of about 1,000 children and operated by a Texas contractor, Baptist Children and Family Services. These are not subject to our licensing division, and they are not subject to any investigations of abuse and neglect. That would be strictly a federal response. We're working very closely with Dr. Kyle Janik, who used to be a state senator from this area, and he's now the executive commissioner of the Health and Human Service Division, and Dr. David Lakey, who is the commissioner of State Health Services. Dr. Lakey has been working on this pretty much daily for a very long period of time, and he is focused on the public health issues. Dr. Janik and the governor met with the president on this issue, and Dr. Lakey coordinates with the CDC and the Health and Human federal officials on a daily basis. We've been very fortunate. There have been a few cases of chickenpox and other childhood illnesses, but largely this is a healthy population and are not presenting any serious illnesses thus far. If they do, Dr. Lakey will coordinate with the hospitals and the various officials to make sure they're given the appropriate care. We have a very open line of communication with representatives of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and we work on proactively identifying what the issues are and the concerns. Frankly, when you start talking about this, you come up with more issues than answers. But we're looking at all the various permutations. Once a child has been released to a sponsor, a relative or a family friend, if there is an allegation of abuse and neglect reported to the Department of Family and Protective Services, we will investigate that just as we do any other allegation of child abuse and neglect. So we will have no responsibility for those children that leave the state of Texas and are released to a sponsor. But if there were issues that come up afterwards, there's a good possibility that we would be involved. Currently, we are not involved, as far as I know, with anywhere in the state of Texas. And just to give you context, today in Harris County, we have over 600,000 children, or 6,000, not 600,000, thank God, 6,000 children in foster care out of Harris County today. So we are very familiar, and 30,000 across the state, so we're very familiar with dealing with large number of children and the issues surrounding that. I didn't see it anywhere else on the program, but I wanted to point out Justice Guzman, through her leadership and through the Children's Commission, has put out a bulletin to all Texas judges that might become involved in giving them context and what is going on. So the Children's Commission helps us a great deal, taking care of all the children in foster care, but is providing as a resource for Texas courts that are involved in this. CJ Broussard, who is sitting right here, is my regional director for Harris County, and so she would be directly involved in any local response, and I'm going to turn it over to her briefly.
Thank you, Judge. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Closer.
As the Regional Director for Harris County Child Protective Services, we want to assure you from our perspective that Child Protective Services is here to be as responsive as we can be when the children, unaccompanied minors, are located in Harris County, Texas. We're aware of that population of children and that their histories may contain extreme violence, trauma, and poverty. And Child Protective Services is very adept with dealing with that type of population. We will be available to provide whatever assistance and collaboration we can provide in light of the fact that we have to respect the jurisdiction of the federal government. Okay, we have worked for many decades, the state and feds, and have intersected with federal immigration authorities and have always maintained an open line of communication with them. We certainly respect the authority of the federal government where this population is concerned. And if these children encounter abuse and neglect while they are in Harris County, Texas, after being released from the physical custody of the federal authorities, CPS will take proactive action as appropriate. Our expertise is willing to be shared with the federal government and any other collaborative partner who would like to tap into us as a resource. We are aware of the community resources. We are aware of the ways to access some mental health and health type of providers. We know who our service providers are, and we're very willing to provide that information if needed. Thank you, Judge.
Since the ORR folks weren't able to be here today, Pam Parker is in my general counsel's office, and she practiced immigration law before she became to work for us. As you might guess, we have a lot of immigration issues, so Pam is my go-to lawyer, and I'm smart enough to bring somebody along that knows what she's talking about. So Pam is going to talk a little bit, just very briefly, because it will be gone over in detail later, about the federal process and what happens to the children once they're released. Pam.
Thank you. Obviously, I don't represent the federal government, but it's a pretty clean line if you look at the statutory division of labor, if you will, in the U.S. Code that assigns a certain responsibility to the immigration authorities, the ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Border Patrol. And so how a UAC, an unaccompanied alien child, as the Immigration Act would refer to them, comes to the attention, as I think Mr. Foster mentioned, they are just submitting or voluntarily engaging with the immigration authorities. But at that point in time, what the federal government does is, whichever enforcement agency is present, they apprehend the child, they initiate essentially the removal, or what we usually call a deportation process, and that's the first step that starts a process that requires an attorney to be involved. Then the child typically is transported within 72 hours. The statute requires that the child is transferred to the federal Health and Human Services. It's really the division of ORR that's been referred to several times. And if you look at the statute, there's a long list of things that ORR is responsible for: placement and care, and they have to allow legal representation to have access, for the child to have access to legal representatives. That doesn't include the appointment of counsel, as Mr. Foster pointed out, but it is, and the statute says something about encouraging pro bono representation. So I guess that's what we're doing today. But the next piece, after the 72 hours, the children are moved to a shelter. There's usually a health screening and further checks of that sort. But for the legal piece of it, the important part is that the ORR representatives are obligated to find either a relative or a sponsor to release the child to whenever possible. They're obligated to put the child in the least restrictive placement possible, which is parallel language to what we all work under with the foster care system. And there's a provision for home studies, but it's somewhat it's not a mandatory on every single child. They're supposed to verify the identity of the child who comes to accept, if it's a relative. There's a whole process there. If a child is released, the sponsor or the relative has to agree to bring the child back to a future hearing. It's somewhat like a bond, but there's no money involved. And again, that's where the volunteer attorneys need to come into play, because without representation, there's a huge gap in that process. If you just want to see this laundry list of the ORR functions, it's probably interesting to look at if you're an attorney who's going to get involved in this process, just because it represents a huge shift. It used to be there was immigration enforcement and there was Department of Health and Human Services, and really the two did not meet. And then this statute effectively transferred the duties, recognizing that for small children who are unaccompanied, you really don't want them in the enforcement system with all the adults. You want them in a more like a foster care setting. So that's the rationale behind it. And if you look at the TVPRA, section 235, you'll get kind of a good little view of what that all looks like. And not being a federal representative, I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I hope that gives you just kind of a glimpse.
Sheriff, I think you had something else you wanted to add.
I wanted to add a couple of things. Number one, we're joined by State Representative Armando Wale, who shared with me a concern that he's got, and one that I agree with, and that is that as you may be processing some of these individuals, and you may start to be thinking about a U visa, number one, we need to do what we can to help support that process, because there needs to be some underlying information documented about the criminal circumstances that could help to support the U visas. But more importantly, one of the greatest challenges I have found is that in most circumstances, when we do rescues of victims of human trafficking, we are almost immediately beginning to ask the question, will you testify against your aggressor? I'm not sure about you, but most people who have been through pretty traumatic circumstance need a little decompression time before they're able to effectively answer that question. If those victims immediately respond with that, I don't know, I'm not sure, or maybe no because of obvious reasons, it puts their application or the potential to get a U visa in very complicated state. Because there's almost no way to go back and then uncheck the box that they're willing to be a witness in a prosecution case. I don't know the immediate answer to that, other than I understand it, we're dealing with it, but it's at several levels throughout the respective law enforcement community. But it's something that I think you need to be aware of. The other thing too, that so number one, a police report when you need it. and then understanding how to work with your respective clients. The second thing is, and this is obviously present company not included, but we have had people who are unethical. We have notarios out there, notary publics, that pass themselves off to be something that they're not. On top of everything else, I asked for that information. I'd love to put some of them folks in jail. Because, yeah. And I got plenty of room. I'm not overcrowded anymore. And then lastly, as you are working, some of you may be volunteering at an agency, maybe at your office or whatever the case may be. But if you happen to pick up any information, any intelligence about planned protest, some very aggressive behavior against some of these, against this circumstance and these children, I would appreciate you forwarding that information to us so that law enforcement can be prepared to contend with those respective issues. Thank you.
I would just like to comment on the last part. My agency is working very closely with the Attorney General's office and the Department of Public Safety on human trafficking issues. That is a major issue. There's a great deal of training being developed on that right now, cooperatively, but we are very aware of that issue with this population and with other populations, and the state is actively involved in making sure we catch those cases, protect those very vulnerable children, both male and female, that may be drug into that. So thank you, Sheriff, for your interest in that. And I would just like to thank the lawyers. Before I picked up this hat, I was a district court judge for 25 years. The lawyers of the state of Texas always step forward to protect children. Every day here in Harris County, you're representing children as ad litems or working for the county attorney's office or working for the parents. So I want to thank you. Y'all once again have stepped up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Commissioner. Thanks for coming in. Thank you all to that panel, and as our next speaker makes their way up, a couple other housekeeping announcements. Let me mention, I saw a great movie with my wife. If you haven't, anybody seen the movie Chef, it's a pretty good movie. This little boy is 10 years old, and he says, "Dad, you don't understand. This is a Twitter." And he says, "You've gone viral." Well, this is a Twitter. If you look on the agenda at the bottom, you'll see my 10-year-old boy, if he were here, my grandson could tell me that's a hashtag. There is an active conversation. So if you want to participate, that's what is occurring over there on the screen. We don't expect you to be able to read it, but if you have comments about it, you join the, quote, Twitter feed. You're in the 21st century. So that's just explain what is going on. You can participate in the conversation at the bottom of your agenda page. On the back side of your agenda page, be sure and see the course ID number so that you can get your credit for hours CLE. The other thing I want to mention is be sure and look at the website once it goes active with papers. There's been a couple references to papers. This morning when I was talking with the representative of the ORR, she immediately, when she got off the phone, sent me a link to some basic information that was referred here about the ORR. We will put that on the website so you'll have access to that as well as other items. When we were in Austin last week, Terry and I went to the Commission on Children that Justice Guzman is chair of. They shared with us 3 white papers. We will put those up, and some of the references that Pam made in terms of the statutes about the duties and the responsibilities of these agencies are all there in the Act. Also, what they gave us from the Office of the Commission on Children is a white paper that explains about the immigrant status. It's a letter that has been sent out to all the judges in the state of Texas in terms of explaining about an issue that you'll be hearing later on. It's down the program called Special Immigrant Status. There will be papers on the website that deal with that. Mr. Foster, Charles, will you introduce our next speaker, please?
It's my pleasure I get to introduce these speakers who really have been in the trenches and work on these types of cases, and now all of a sudden this has come to a forefront. And the next speaker is very special, Naomi Bangs. She's with South Texas College of Law, where she heads, she's a professor, heads their immigration clinic, and has been in private practice for many years too. Naomi, on the 2008 Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which is the overall framework in which they can have their rights recognized.
Okay. I don't know how to open this up and to get my PowerPoint up. Could somebody help me? Okay. Oh, there it is. Good. Okay. Charlie used to be my old boss at FosterQuan for the last 8 years, so I'm especially happy to be here today. My topic today is the TVPRA, and that is my favorite law in the world. It is, oops, let me see. I guess it's not up here. Okay. The United Nations had been promulgated a protocol against human trafficking for decades, and in 2000, our country finally took it upon itself to promulgate it. It became the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and then afterwards, every year you put the R in because it's been reauthorized every year. We're talking about the TVPRA today because in 2008, Congress enacted a special section that has to do with children, and that's the section we're going to talk about today. Okay. Somebody asked me before I came in to talk today, is there some type of special relief, such as a TVPRA visa, for these kids who are coming over on the top of trains over into the country? So I think there's a little bit of misinformation or misconceptions about what the TVPRA is. The TVPRA Section 235 actually amends and modifies certain already existing avenues of relief that have always been around for years. For those of us who've been in this practice, we have already been working with unaccompanied children over the last few years with some of these avenues of relief. The TVPRA simply adds to it or makes it a little bit easier. It has certain substantive changes to the actual immigration law. The procedures for custody and detention have been made more gentler, more kinder. Instead of Department of Justice and Department of Human Service, the DHS, it's now HHS. It's a nicer way, and you'll see throughout the code that this feeling reflects a concern about children, who are the most vulnerable in our community. Okay. Let's go first to what is a UAC? It's not just any unaccompanied child. It is a term of art under the statute, and there are specific requirements to qualify as a UAC. Number one, they have to have no lawful immigration status in the United States. That means they have no visa, they have no right to be here, they did not enter with any authorization. 2, they are under the age of 18. 3, they either have no parent or legal guardian in the United States or no parent or legal guardian in the United States available to provide care. And that's important because, as you know from the news, a lot of these children are coming in because they want to be reunited with their parents or other family members that have already made it into the United States. I think Mr. Foster talked a little bit about contiguous and non-contiguous countries. The TVPRA provisions that we're going to be talking about today have to do mostly with the countries that don't touch upon our borders, like Mexico and Canada. We'll be talking mostly about the children from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and those are the ones who have actually contributed to the tremendous rise in the numbers coming over our border. I think in 2010 they comprised about 13-17%, and now they're up to about 85%. And it's kind of flipped. Before it used to be mostly the Mexican children coming over, but now it's kind of flipped to the Central American countries. There are still protections for those who come from Mexico, but it's a little bit different. We will not touch upon that today, but you can check it in 235A that does describe some of the procedures. I just wanted to briefly go over the players so you have a framework, because for those of you who are going to take cases, you're going to have to deal with these entities, and they will be woven through some of the reliefs that you'll be exploring. The children first come in at the border. They are captured by the Border Control, CBP. Then ICE, another branch of the federal government, will transport them to HHS and ORR. This is different from before when they used to go to DHS custody. Now they're going to go to Health and Human Services. And they take care of the UACs. They do screening. They use more of a best interest analysis in terms of taking care of the children rather than a purely adult detention-focused one. USCIS is the former Immigration and Naturalization Service that handles visas, but they are also tasked with doing the asylum cases for our UACs when they come in. And finally, the Office of Immigration Review handles all the immigration courts, and that's where the immigration judges sit, and that's what you have known as deportation courts. Those are some of the entities you'll be dealing with in the various different types of legal remedies. Here are the 3 different remedies that I'm going to talk about for TVPRA. Now, before this whole influx happened, there are many different types of legal avenues that exist already for these children. So it's wrong to assume that everybody who comes in here is immediately illegal, because a lot of them do qualify for different various forms of relief, such as Sheriff Garcia was talking about the U visa for victims of violent crime. There are other avenues that you will hear from the panelists after me. But in the TVPRA, I wanted to focus on these 3 things because the federal statute actually makes these provisions even easier to get, and that is good for you as practitioners, and I hope that you take these cases and you will find that this will make your life a little bit easier. First, for asylum, and you'll hear a panel on asylum, so I won't go into any detail on any of these reliefs, but it's basically someone who fears going back to their country for various different enumerated reasons. And under the TVPRA, they have made it a little bit easier. Same thing with the T visa, which is the trafficking visa. T for trafficking is for victims of severe trafficking. And some of these children will qualify for that. Some of them have been smuggled in, but some of them might be trafficked in, or that smuggling may turn into trafficking. SIJ is probably an immigration relief that many people are not aware of. And it is basically when a child who has been found to be abused, neglected, or abused, or a similar basis under state law, and you need to have an order from a family judge or a juvenile court kind of decreeing this, and that reunification is not viable with the family, that they are also entitled to immigration relief, and that turns into a green card later on. And a lot of people in our public don't know this exists, but it is an already existing avenue of relief. The TVPRA made these 3 avenues of relief even simpler, and you'll hear more of the details from each of the panels, but just a brief overview. Number 1, they are exempt from certain various filing deadlines. In asylum, they no longer have to do the 1-year deadline, which you will hear about. Also, in terms of different exceptions, some people are disqualified because they are able to live in a 3rd country. This no longer applies to children, UAC, who are applying for asylum. In asylum cases, sometimes in other immigration cases, they have to go to immigration court. But here it allows the child to have their asylum interview in a more friendly, less adversarial setting, and that is with an immigration officer rather than a scary judge with a prosecutor there. The immigrant SIJ status, you'll see in the SIJ panel that the definition is so much better for you. You'll be able to qualify a lot more easily than you were able to do before. And then later on, when the child gets through this and they're able to qualify for their green card, they're given even further waivers or pardons. So things that might have disqualified them before are no longer going to disqualify them. So you can see that the TVPRA has really just made life a little bit easier for the UACs for the already existing issues. Okay. Ethics alerts, since we have to add some ethics credits here. I wanted to point out in these types of cases, you're going to be dealing with very sympathetic children, with very sympathetic victims. They are going to be victims of persecution and violence, and their stories are horrendous. Even their journey up here was horrendous. You're going to be dealing with abused and neglected children. You're going to be dealing with trafficking victims, children. I cannot think of any more heart-wrenching stories. As a result, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful because the victims themselves also have benefits. They have motives, perhaps not to tell the truth or to maybe be confused. They will get legal immigration status if they're successful. They will get employment authorization. They will get relief from pending deportation. And they will get benefits for their derivatives. And in some of these cases, they qualify for a visa. Those benefits go back to their parents or their siblings or their children or their spouses back in their country. So that is another benefit that is going to be in their minds, and one I know that the press was asking about because they're always sensitive about whether parents or other family members can piggyback on these children, and yes, in some cases, they will be able to. Ethic red flags. Please look very carefully at the client's backgrounds. Know that they might be subject to a great deal of misinformation. There are tremendous cultural differences in how they perceive the truth, their statements, their facts. There are language barriers because most of them do not speak English, and your emotions will be tested. Whether you're young or old, if you're new in this area, the consequences are very high. You have a client, unlike an oil company or a corporation, whose success in this will entail their life or death. So for you, it's going to be a little bit more personal. Therefore, here's your key for ethics. You shall always tell the truth. You shall not make a false statement. You will not offer evidence that a lawyer thinks to be false, knows to be false. And this is in front of a tribunal which includes the USCIS and any of these government agencies that we spoke about a few slides ago. Honesty, no fraud, no dishonesty. You already know that. And also you should know that good intentions are not a defense. And I've had many students say, but I just had to do it. I'm like, it's not an excuse. And you might think it's wrong and the law is wrong, but it's not an excuse. So my safeguards to you are to basically use good translators, make sure you understand your client, use assistance, speak with other people to get an objective view of the case. It might not be what you think when it first comes in. Corroborate your documents. If they were abused or harmed, get those hospital records, get those police records from back in their former jurisdiction. Review and review and review their statements. It will change. Quite often, you're going to have a lot of patience to go over it. Work closely with a mentor and a clinic. And we are here to help you. And you will hear that a little bit later on from all the law schools and nonprofits and volunteer mentors here. We are here to help you. And we ask that when you take a case for the least of these, if you want to be involved in any types of trafficking work, and I get a lot of calls about lawyers who want to do trafficking as work, this is as close as you get. And you get to really defend children, the clients who really need your services. So I thank you for listening, and this is just a very brief overview, but hopefully it gives you a taste so that you can delve more into it a few minutes.
Thank you, Naomi. And will the next panel come up? And if we have Jill McMillan, from a supervisory attorney with the asylum. Is she here?
Asylum.
No. Let's see. All right. Well, this next panel is asylum, which is sort of the most basic right that one would think of in terms of protecting. You would seek to protect an unaccompanied minor. And we have an outstanding panel. And led by Jeff Hoffman, who heads the law clinic at the University of Houston Law Center, the Immigration Law Clinic. Next to him is Ann Chandler, who's the Houston director for the Here Justice Center. And next to him is Professor Fernando Colon, professor of immigration law at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law at Texas Southern University. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Foster, and thank you to the county attorney. It's really remarkable that all these groups were able to come together on such short notice, and it's an honor for me to be here today to talk about asylum. By the way, before I start that, we have AILA, which is the American Immigration Lawyers Association Task Force, which I'm part of. We've created a series of CLEs that will happen about once per month. And that will, the save the date schedule for that is on the tables. So as you leave, you can get those. One of them is going to be at the University of Houston, another at Catholic Charities, another at South Texas. Okay, so I'm going to talk first about UAC asylum claims. It's a little bit impossible to teach you about asylum in 20 minutes. And it's impossible, but what I can do is hit the high points and give you some idea about various issues that'll come up that specifically relate to unaccompanied alien children. After I speak, Professor Colon Navarro from Thurgood Marshall will talk for a couple minutes discussing further issues, and then Ann Chandler will talk about the other issues, derivative citizenship, etc. So to qualify for asylum, the definition is the same as a refugee. Any person who's outside any country of the person's nationality, or in the case of a person having no nationality, and who is unable or unwilling to return, and is unable and willing to avail himself or herself of the protection of that country because of persecution. We'll hit all these concepts. Because of persecution or a well-founded fear of persecution. So we'll talk about what that means. On account of, this is the nexus requirement. It has to be on account of. It's not good enough just to have persecution. It must be related to or in connection with race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion. Now, before we get started talking about persecution, talking about nexus, I wanted to go over some ethical issues that specifically relate to UACs. The ability to participate in interviews will be obviously dependent upon the age of the child. Trauma will dramatically affect the development of a child. Trauma means chaotic social conditions, violence, lack of protection, caring by adults. It could be nutritional deficits, physical and mental disabilities. The capacity to consent may be called into question. Parents can sign forms under the 8 CFR, which is the immigration regulations. Parents can sign the form if the child is under 14. 14 and older, the child can sign the I-589, which is the application for asylum. Parents can be given notice. You as pro bono counsel have to think or determine whether the parents and the child's interests align, or are they at odds? And remember, children cannot present testimony with the same level of precision as adults. Obviously, it's very difficult to represent some of these cases because of the lack of sophistication in telling the story, recalling facts, and creating a case. Some other child-sensitive interviewing techniques, some ethical considerations in terms of representing children. Shorter meetings to hold because of their attention span. Show empathy, speak with facts, try to be non-judgmental. A lot of these cases we do in the immigration clinic at the University of Houston. We see children who may take weeks and months to open up to the student attorney or the licensed attorney because they don't feel comfortable initially. They're going to be scared. They're going to see you as an authority figure. And so you need to have several, maybe even multiple meetings with these kids. Ask open-ended questions. Ask what happened next. Things like that. Avoid complex, compound questions. A lot of times we as lawyers think in terms of compound questions. And it's very difficult for them to understand. Use active, reflective listening and check in with them. So a lot of times, a lot of these children, they won't check in with you. They won't call you about their case. You'll have to follow up and check in with them. Okay, so now persecution. What is it? When does it occur? It's defined by the Board of Immigration Appeals case law as the infliction of harm or suffering by a government So we have this governmental requirement, governmental conduct, or persons that a government is unwilling or unable to control. Okay, so that could be gangs. It could be family members. It could relate to a wide variety of actors, but there is that governmental conduct requirement. A subjective, punitive, or malignant intent is not required, but the definition of persecution does not encompass treatment that our society may consider unfair or unjust or unlawful or unconstitutional. Harms solely relating to or arising out of civil strife are also not covered. The nexus requirement. Remember that they must, as we said earlier, you saw the definition of refugee. There must be a nexus. I've been in court and I've represented respondents, and the judge has said, you know what, I agree with you. There's terrible persecution here. I agree with you, terrible situation, but show me the nexus. Show me the relationship between the persecution and one of these 5 enumerated grounds. So you as the attorney, that's your job, to come up with the connection to one of these 5 grounds: race, religion, nationality. Remember, in a lot of these cases, nationality includes ethnicity. So we have a case right now pending in the Fifth Circuit where we have a child, he's now 18, but he was a child when he came to us, and he's a Quiche. So that may be, if he's persecuted because he's a Quiche ethnicity. Membership in a particular social group, and for a lot of cases, children's cases, this will be the most important. It's your duty and your job, and that's why it's so interesting to represent cases like this. It's your job to formulate the PSG. Nobody's going to tell you what the PSG is. The judge or the immigration officer in this case is going to say, what's the PSG? And you might have to write a short brief discussing what the PSG is. Political opinion. With respect to UAC cases, you can have multiple PSGs. And so you might want to get a mentor. You should really have a mentor. And the University of Houston and other groups are going to offer themselves as mentors, because you need to talk about what's the PSG. It could fit into many, many different types, and there could be multiple ones in a single case. You can have more than one PSG. But 2 frequent formulations are going to be gang-based, particular social group, and domestic violence, particular social group. Now, these are by no means easy to prove. And sometimes immigration judges will say, I don't grant gang-based cases. Well, as we'll see, there's a lot of adverse decisions on gang-based cases. But that doesn't mean they're impossible, because there are some, and we'll talk about some formulations that might work. So I'm not going to go through all of these. For some reason, the PDF messed up. But these are all available on the website, so you can read what all these cases. These are the 4 most important gang-based cases: SEG, EAG, WGR, and MEVG. It's a little messed up here, but the bottom line is that if there's not this requirement, if there's not social visibility or social distinction, they call it. We don't have time to go into that, but if it's not a socially distinct group, that the society where they come from recognizes them as a group, then they're going to deny a case as being an improper PSG. So in these cases, the BIA has rejected social group. For example, in WGR, former members of Mara 18 gang, okay, who've renounced their gang membership. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to win these cases. So we're going to talk about strategies that might be available. The starting point for PSG claim is matter of Acosta. In that case, in 95, the board required that PSG, to be cognizable, must relate to immutable or a fundamental characteristic. And what might that be? Immutable fundamental characteristic, a common immutable characteristic that the members either cannot change or should not be required to change because it's fundamental to their individual identities. In Acosta, El Salvadorian taxi drivers was not found to be fundamental. Now, gang-based, and I try to give you some ideas. I'm not saying this is going to apply in every case, but I'm giving you ideas, strategies to argue PSG in these gang-based cases. So those who have been witnesses to a crime or reported the crime to local authorities, prosecutorial witness relating to gang violence, that might be an appropriate PSG, okay? Those who, because of their young age, would be targeted by gangs, That's considered a mutable characteristic, street children. Those who have some other special characteristic, such as sexual identity, transgender, some other issue. Those whose religion, ethnicity, culture, or linguistic identity make them part of a particular social group, such as Quiche we talked about. Some more context about the evolution of PSG claims, homosexuals in Cuba, female genital mutilation, disabled children in Russia. These have all been held to be appropriate PSGs. The UN definition is a particular social group as a group of persons who share a common characteristic other than their risk of being persecuted, who are perceived as a group by their society. And so there's been this idea in terms of some of the officers in the Department of Homeland Security that just resisting gang recruitment is too large a group. It has to be something more particularized. Matter of SEG, matter of EAG, these two cases really set up what we call the social visibility and the particularity requirements under the PSG requirements. So Salvadoran, we already talked about SEG, and former gang members. Former gang members, just by virtue of being a former gang member is not a cognizable PSG. Now, it's complicated, that's why it's hard to teach in 20 minutes the development of this, but 6 circuit courts have upheld SEG, which means that they agree with the Board of Immigration Appeals. But 3 courts have actually disagreed with SEG and EAG, saying that there may be some flaws with the board's reasoning, the Board of Immigration Appeals reasoning. So in Arbina Mejia, for example, the 6th Circuit relied primarily on Acosta's definition and found that a former gang member could be part of a PSG. The 9th Circuit also recently did an en banc decision and held that the El Salvadorian girl who testified against gang members, remember we talked about a prosecutorial witness would be a better formulation of PSG, and said that might meet the definition. So the board in SEG has reasoned that age is outside an applicant's control, making it an immutable characteristic. Adequate mechanisms within asylum law can deal with aging out, such as finding a fundamental change of circumstances. There's an 8th Circuit case saying that a young person should not be precluded from PSGs for simply passing the age of 18. And there's various cases that you'll need to review if you have these type of cases. Street children, the board has found in 2001 that abandoned street children in Nicaragua amounted to a PSG. In that case, the boy had seen his parents killed by guerrillas and they were left on the streets where he was continuously vulnerable to violence and abuse. The board has also found it was on account of an imputed political opinion. In cases of severe humanitarian asylum should be considered as well. So remember, it's not just limited to particular social group. There may be other overtones of, as we said, nationality, ethnicity, political opinion, or other formulations. It's up to you to formulate what the basis, the statutory enumerated ground is going to be in any particular case. So formulating PSGs for gang-based cases, we talked about age, but it can also be combined with other more socially visible, distinct characteristics. Ask about disabilities. Ask about abandonment as street children. Geographical location in the country. Ask about their values, their political beliefs, the family. Ask about prosecutorial witness, forced recruitment, and any other particularized circumstances that might support the PSG. So I want to talk a little bit about family. If the family members of the children themselves have been prosecutorial witnesses, if the nuclear family members have political opinion claims, there's what's called imputed political opinion. There's ways that you can use that to piggyback a claim that might support a PSG for children. Other types of cases. So we already talked a little bit about gender. violence concerning homosexuals or sexual identity. Gender might be a possibility in particular cases. Domestic violence, so there's a case called Matter of RA that applies to spousal violence, women in domestic relationships who are unable to leave, and women who are viewed as property by virtue of their positions within a domestic relationship. Recently, in the past few years, this has been a growing area of immigration law, of asylum law, and you can apply it to abused children, because abused children are also in a domestic relationship that they're not able to leave. And so that you have to look at the family situation and see if that also could be used as a PSG. Religion, occasionally as a basis for recruitment, more often persecution is due to church-based anti-gang efforts. We already talked about political opinion. And let me just say a word just to conclude. These are very, very fact-intensive, case-specific cases. You can't cut corners. I mean, you can, but it's not a good idea. Don't use canned briefs and templates to the exclusion of doing the work of investigating the claim of your clients. Be aware that the BIA has not foreclosed gang-based cases, but just emphasized in the latter two cases that I talked about in the gang-based cases, WGR and MEVR, they remanded the case. They remanded the case for further fact-finding. So a lot of these cases, you're going to have to spend a lot of time. You're going to have to gather the evidence, help clients with affidavits, present the record. You might have to get country condition experts. You might have to get psychological reports, because that's how you win these cases. If you go into court or if you go in front of a CIS officer and your application packet is like this, you're not going to win. You need a lot of evidence, and that's your job as the attorney. And they are a lot of work. They're also very satisfying. They're very, very satisfying. If you can win asylum for a child, it's the best feeling in the world. Resources. The Law of Asylum by Deborah Anchors, what we use in the clinic. The Asylum Primer by Regina Germain is also excellent. Some other resources, the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at Hastings is excellent. And if you email them, they will help you. They will send you materials. Gender-based asylum resources and technical assistance. So in closing, I just want to let you know that we at the University of Houston and also the ALA UAC Task Force are creating ways for you guys as potential pro bono counsel to reach out to us to serve as mentors. We're here for you. We want you to be taking these cases, and if you reach out to us by email or phone, we'll put you in touch with a mentor, somebody who actually has done these cases and has expertise. So we're creating that, and that'll be talked about at 4 o'clock, but we're creating that mechanism. You have my email, you have our phone number. Feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the short time that I'll be here, my job is not to do the wonderful job the professor did in terms of the law, but what I want to bring is a different perspective, and that is the personal you. The law is easy to learn. You're lawyers. The law you can read. You can learn how to prepare affidavits. You know all those things. But in cases of political asylum, as much as Professor Guzman has told you that you need to prepare, there is a side to it, and that is you must believe what your client is trying to say. What's not reflected clearly on the law is that in these cases, there is an issue of credibility. No asylee, no person seeking refuge comes in with a letter from a gang or from documentation or an iPad or an iPhone film video like we have all over, showing how they were beaten, showing how they were tortured. They don't have that with them. And in fact, most of the asylum cases, asylum comes up as a result of the investigation of the attorney. After speaking to the client, you start figuring out, but wait a second, you are from here. I worked in my first years doing asylum with Salvadorian clients. So that was during the Salvadorian War, the death squads, all those things. So I knew immediately when somebody told me, I need help, I'm from El Salvador. I knew right away what the first thing I had to do. And I knew it was an issue of credibility. Now, you would think that children would not create from the system a problem of credibility. Well, if you think so, watch the TV every day. People asking for those kids to be returned without due process. So that's the task that you must deal with. Investigation. They're not going to tell you. I have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of one of the grounds. In fact, all of you as attorneys know that no client in any area of law comes to you and says, you know, I had a contractual relationship with my neighbor. We enter into an offer and acceptance. I thought that I paid. No, they come into you and they say, I have a problem. These children are going to need somebody that's going to take care of their problems. And it's up to you to deal with them. Remember, in a lot of these countries, the officer of the court is part of the repression. So when you tell a client, there is a client privilege because I am an officer of the court, immediately that triggers a reaction. Wait a second, you work for the court? And all those things get mixed in the equation of having to deal with asylum cases. Let me close because I was given enough time, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity on the issue of dealing with human beings. One of the most memorable cases that I remember in terms of investigation was a Salvadorian female in Boston. I was directing the Harvard Clinic, and I met with her for about 3 hours, got some questions, nothing specific. And I had a student, and I told my student, I thought it was a gender problem. I thought it was a gender problem. So I told one of my female students, tomorrow, talk to her. She came back the next day with reams of paper, notebooks, my student. And I thought, well, either I should go back to being a student or, I have a problem. I don't know how to interview. Here's the story. This young lady was in a bus stop, waiting for the bus. Car pulls up, speaks Spanish to her, offers her a ride. She takes the ride. She ends up in a hotel being tortured for 3 weeks, sodomized, tortured, for 3 weeks. The person that did this was of Puerto Rican descent. Happens to have my accent, have my look. And that was enough for her to completely stop. So, to conclude, I just want to give you the feel that your job is more than just being an attorney. It's dealing with human beings that are seeking refuge and that depend on you as attorneys to prepare the case of them. Thank you very much for trying to help, and appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ann Chandler, and my heart is warmed to be part of this symposium today and to have the opportunity to talk in 3 minutes about a statute that might take an hour or so, 5. called the Violence Against Women Act, and I'm also going to talk about the other issues of temporary protected status and derivative citizenship. The Violence Against Women Act is a piece of legislation that Congress passed to really remedy problems in our family petition immigration system. The majority of immigrants that become legal permanent residents and later naturalize under our laws do so because of family petitions, because citizens and legal permanent residents have the ability under our immigration laws to submit family petitions to bring in loved ones. Congress recognizes that when there is violence in the relationship, when there is domestic violence, when there is incest, when there is child abuse, that family petition process where the citizen and the legal permanent resident are primarily tooled with the power to be submitting paperwork to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, it breaks down. Things aren't done as they should be done. And thus the Violence Against Women Act, a comprehensive statute to really eliminate domestic violence and child abuse, not just against women, but against men, girls and boys, and parents, is an immigration provision. And these immigration provisions were strengthened through the TVPRA, as Naomi eloquently described. And it allows both abused children to self-petition, abused spouses to self-petition, and abused parents to self-petition. And often as we're working with these children, we'll be on a track and we'll say, this is an SIJ case, this is an asylum case. I understand the fear and the violence in the home country, and we'll realize that there may be something amiss in a personal relationship in the home environment here in the Houston area. And so I'm here to ask to have those antlers on as you're working on the case and realize maybe the child is reunified with a mother here who is now remarried to a legal permanent resident that is abusive, and that child is living in that household. There may be an opportunity under the Violence Against Women Act for that child to have an alternative avenue to prevent deportation and remain here safely in the United States. Alternatively, unfortunately, a lot of these children, their life as a juvenile is compressed. Childhood sometimes races quickly by, and they become young adults for reasons of circumstances and find themselves in a marriage relationship. Texas, it's a common law state. If there is violence, and the Violence Against Women Act defines violence either as physical or sexual violence, but also extreme cruelty, your unaccompanied child that you're representing may, in fact, if a marriage relationship exists, be a petitioner, self-petitioner under the Violence Against Women Act. So that's my 3 minutes for VAWA. And now I have 2 minutes related to talk to, maybe I'll just choose derivative citizenship. Our citizenship laws are amazing, wonderfully complicated, but if someone is not born in the United States, but rather born abroad, that individual born abroad may in fact be a citizen at birth because one or both of their parents were citizens, or if that individual comes to the United States and happens to have a parent that has adopted them under circumstances, that child may derive citizenship at a later time. So think when you're working with the kid, tell me about your parents, tell me about your grandparents, and there's no other joy that an immigration attorney may have than realizing that a kid that they're representing from El Salvador is actually a citizen because their mother or their father was a citizen. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Houston legal community, for caring so much about this vulnerable population, and I hope you learned everything there is to know about VAWA and citizenship in 5 minutes.
I want to thank Jeff, Fernando, and Ann for the really outstanding presentations. And we're trying, there's so much to cover, and we've tried to squeeze in so much, and fortunately, as you've been reminded, all of the materials online posted on the Harris County Attorney's website and other places. We also have mics for questions if there's any time left over, but we may not have immediately. So I'd like the panelists, the next panelists, to come up right away. On the next major form of relief, you've heard that referred to, and that's T and U non-immigrant visas. And we have Kristen Zippel-Shedd, supervising attorney with Catholic Charities, and Professor Maurice Hugh, immigration law professor at Texas Southern University, Thurgood Marshall School of Law. And finally, Michelle Permenter, Director of Victims Witness Unit at the Harris County District Attorney's Office. So who's going to lead off? Kristen.
Thank you very much to the County Attorney's Office and everyone who's been involved in planning this wonderful CLE. Thank you also to all of you for making time out of your busy schedules to learn about this very vulnerable population, and thank you in advance for the ways that we hope that you'll step up and help to meet the needs of these kids who've been through some really tremendously awful experiences. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll be talking about the T visa, which is a form of immigration relief that's available for victims of human trafficking. Before I talk about the T visa, I think it's important to clarify what constitutes human trafficking, which is the basis for the type of immigration relief about which I'll be speaking very briefly. I know that there's upcoming CLEs that you'll get more information about today that will teach you in more detail about how to help an unaccompanied minor apply for this type of relief. But you heard Naomi Bang talk about the Trafficking Victims Protection Act today, which is the federal law that establishes a framework that defines what human trafficking is. The TVPA generally distinguishes between two types of human trafficking: forced commercial sexual exploitation and forced labor. Although the word human trafficking, the crime human trafficking, makes one think, and used to make me think that there was movement or trafficking involved, kind of movement of persons, that's incorrect. The central requirement of constituting human trafficking are the elements of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of forcing someone to engage in forced commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor, like domestic servitude. The types of force, fraud, and coercion that perpetrators of human trafficking use throughout our community against unaccompanied minors, against adults, against U.S. citizens is mind-blowing, really. I've worked in social services my entire career, and in the 6 years in which I've been in Catholic Charities, I continue to be astonished and speechless sometimes when victims share with me the different types of exploitation that traffickers use to force them into a situation of forced labor or forced commercial sex. We have clients who've been forced to drink their own urine because they don't have enough food or drink. Kids who've been actually branded with a tattoo of the perpetrator or the criminal ring of the perpetrators to show that they're not a person anymore, they're actually the property of the perpetrator. So it's a big cycle of force, fraud, or coercion that prevents these people from really being able to leave the situation and makes immigration relief like the T visa so important. I thought it would be helpful for me, or helpful for you as I explain what the T visa is and the requirements for qualifying for a T visa, to share briefly the stories of two of the unaccompanied minors with whom I've had the privilege of representing in my time at Catholic Charities. I'll call them Juan and Sandra. Juan is became a victim of labor trafficking. Like a lot of unaccompanied minors, he came to the United States when he was a teenager. He came at the age of 13 because of extreme poverty. His family didn't have enough food to feed him and his brothers and sisters. He was living on the streets even though his parents weren't actually abusive towards him, but he just didn't have any other option. So he literally took trains and buses and walked at the age of 13 to the United States. After he crossed the border, he spent a week working in Mexico so that he could earn money to buy shoes that he could wear into the United States. After he was able to purchase those ratty pair of tennis shoes, he waded across the river and he entered at Laredo and literally walked from Laredo to El Paso. After I first met Juan, I did Google Maps to figure out how far this young kid had walked. It was about 650 miles, although I'm sure he didn't take the most direct route. By the time he ended up in El Paso and met this man who introduced himself as Mr. B, he literally couldn't walk anymore. His feet were swollen and bruised. He was hungry. He was dehydrated. And Mr. B said, hey, come rest with us. We'll give you food to eat. We'll give you a place to stay. You just need to work on our farm. You know, we'll help you get situated here. He didn't have any other options, and he thought the offer sounded particularly alluring, so he agreed. Mr. B let him rest for a day, and then after a day, put him to work. He was working 13 hours a day, 7 days a week on the family ranch, in the family tile business. Some days he had only like an apple to eat and water. He was sleeping in a trailer that didn't have electricity. He was forced to use a bathroom outside. Just really horrible conditions until Child Protective Services came and rescued him. Sandra is a sort of a classic or representative. She's a victim of sex trafficking who we represented, and her story is similar to a lot of the other victims of forced commercial sexual exploitation, the unaccompanied minors with whom we work at Catholic Charities. But she came at the suggestion of her boyfriend, or a man she thought was her boyfriend, who kind of wooed her in a relationship and said, hey, let's go build our life together in the United States. I've got an aunt who lives in Houston. You can go and take care of her kids. We'll get you situated, and then we can save money and buy a house and build the family that we want to build. As soon as I got here, he said, oh, I've actually got to go but take care of some other business, but my aunt, you'll be in good care with my aunt. She's going to help you get a job and get situated. As soon as he left, the physical, sexual, verbal, and emotional abuse began. She realized that she had accrued a pretty tremendous debt that was never a part of the conversation in her decision to come to the United States. And then the aunt, she quickly realized that she wouldn't be caring for the aunt's children, rather she would be forced to prostitute herself in the cantinas in the area to pay off her debt. Just subject to a lot of horrible physical, emotional, sexual, verbal abuse, just like Juan, just like a lot of the other unaccompanied minors who are or become victims of trafficking. So hearing the stories of Juan and Sandra, it makes sense that one purpose of the T visa, the immigration relief for trafficking victims, is humanitarian. Kids like Juan, kids like Sandra, they need the opportunity to move forward from their victimization. They've suffered really tremendous violations, really significant trauma, and they need help to move forward so that they're not re-victimized and so that they can move towards being in a place where they can be made whole again. But then there's also an important purpose to the T visa and the U visa, and that's a public interest purpose. We need these victims we need them to cooperate with law enforcement. They're afraid, they're scared, and they need to be able to be in a position where they can be made whole, where they can get the mental health services that they need, the food that they need, so that they can help cooperate with law enforcement in the investigation and prosecution of the crimes. Michelle's going to speak a little bit later about the U visa certification, but I think that the requirement of the certification for the U visas and the way that it's powerful in T visa application shows how important it is that victims of trafficking, unaccompanied minors and adult victims, cooperate with law enforcement in the investigation and prosecution of the crimes, because we need their help to criminally investigate and prosecute the people who are responsible for perpetrating these heinous acts. One type of temporary immigration relief that's available for trafficking victims like Juan and Sandra is something called continued presence. It's something that federal law enforcement helps the victims apply for to stabilize them. It's employment authorization just for a year, and it's valid only as long as the government deems it necessary. There's a more permanent type of relief that's available called the T visa, or T non-immigrant status, that affords a person who's a victim of trafficking, kids like Sandra and kids like Juan, to get 4 years of non-immigrant status in the United States, permission to work here legally, stay here legally during that time, the possibility of applying for qualifying family members, the possibility of applying for adjustment of status at a later time. And the next slide outlines just the 4 requirements for qualifying for a T visa. The person has to show that she's a victim of severe form of human trafficking in persons. So with Sandra, we showed that she was a victim of forced commercial sexual exploitation. With Juan, he was a victim of forced labor. The victim has to show that she's physically present in the United States on account of the acts of trafficking. With Sandra, it was easy to show because the person who was responsible for perpetrating her victimization literally brought her, arranged for her transport to the United States. With the kid Juan, it was a little bit different because he was here and then became a victim of trafficking, but we were able to show that his presence was necessary here so that he could continue to cooperate in the criminal investigation of Mr. B, and also that he could continue to access services available to him that he needed to move forward from his victimization. The third requirement is that the person has to show that she'll suffer extreme hardship if she can't stay in the U.S. With Sandra, it turned out that the person, her boyfriend, the person who lured her into the trafficking situation was connected with a pretty violent criminal ring in Mexico, in her home country, and that she was clear that she faced significant risks to her health and safety, the risk of revenge from him and his compadres to put her in a bad situation. The law looks at lots of different details of the victim and the situation. There's lots of different ways that you can show that the person will suffer extreme hardship. And then also another requirement is that the victim cooperate with law enforcement in the investigation or prosecution of the acts of trafficking unless the victim is a minor. So that's an issue sometimes where we have ethical dilemmas that come up because we want to empower our clients to make decisions. Like, we can't pressure them to cooperate with law enforcement even though we know that the person who perpetrated the crime against them did something that was really horrible and should be punished. We have to educate and inform our clients, and we hope that you'll do the same with the unaccompanied minors with whom you represent. So that's the end of my time. I sort of talked through the last slides, but I think I had grand ideas about how quickly I was going to talk. But thank you all again for being here. I hope that you'll continue to be a part of the movement to serve these really vulnerable kids who really need all of our help.
Okay, thank you for being here, and hopefully I can teach you something. So hopefully someone can help some of these children. I'm supposed to talk on U visas, and I want to thank Sheriff Adrian Garcia because he was here and he actually spoke on U visas. And I also saw a lot of the police officers that are here, so hopefully I'll get your attention, and some of these some of the prosecutors out there as well. I'm a former prosecutor, and one of the things that we always had difficulties with as being a police officer as well as a prosecutor is how do we keep our victims and how do we keep our witnesses, how do we keep them in pocket? How do we keep track of them to basically come to court and basically testify? And as Kristen had pointed out, some of these individuals are actually scared. Now add to the fact that some of your victims are going to be children, and then also add to the fact that some of these children are actually going to be in deportation or removal proceedings. So wait a minute, yeah, you heard that right. So the government is going to be deporting or removing the victims that you need to put your criminal defendants away. Okay? So this U visa is actually for you. And here's the elements of the U visa. There's the statute up on top, as well as the INA, and I also provided you with the Code of Federal Regulations. I always tell my students to look at the CFR, look at the CFR, look at the CFR, because this is the interpretation of the statute. And this is what the government actually, and how they interpret the statute. So first of all, you have to be a victim of a statutory listed crime. Second, you have to be helpful in a criminal investigation. So for the police, for the prosecutors out there, these individuals are meant to help you. And this visa is for them to help you so they don't get deported. Okay? Now, these individuals also have to show substantial physical or mental abuse. And as Kristen had pointed out, is that for the U visa, there must be a law enforcement agency certification. Now, for the T visa, you don't necessarily have to have that. You can actually file for the T without the certification. But for a U, you can't do that. Now, to just mention the types of crimes, they're there. I mean, rape, torture, trafficking. Now, Kristen talked about trafficking, which is the T visa. But if you're, and the T visa is specific for trafficking. okay? But you need to also know is that trafficking also falls under the broader definition of a U. So if you're a victim of a different type of crime, including trafficking, you might be able to qualify for not only T, but the U as well, okay? Now, I want to point out that these crimes are also federal. Congress passed this, right? So they're federal. We have 50 different states. State of Texas is going to have a different definition. I had a 16-year-old girl, and she had delivered a child. And basically what wound up happening was that the boyfriend was the defendant, and he actually pled guilty to violation of a felony protected order. Now, we all know, what's the statutory elements of violating a protective order? Well, you have to have a protective order first, right? So I went back, looked at the court record, and it was a mutually agreed on court protective order. So I'm like, well, where's the domestic violence fighting over the kid? I looked in the criminal record. We all knew the facts was that there was domestic violence was in there. But where was the domestic violence? There was a mutually agreed court order, but I couldn't find a domestic violence. So I looked at these statutes, and what happened is that there's obstruction of justice in here. So I looked at obstruction of justice under the federal statutes. I looked at the state Texas statutes for violation of a protective order, and where they met pretty frequently, right? And it was just about a categorical match. So instead of applying for this young girl for domestic violence, I actually applied for violation of a obstruction of justice, and lo and behold, the government actually agreed and they approved it. Helpfulness in a criminal investigation. Now, if you read the statute actually provides has been, is, or is likely to help, too. So what we have is we have has and past, we have present, and we also have future. Now, I'm not going to talk, didn't happen in Houston, right? So I'm going to talk about some other agencies and some other jurisdictions I've been handling with these U visas. But I've had one where there was a prosecutor and the case was finished. The defendant did these horrible things to the victim, but I guess that's why we call them victims, right? And then the victim was brought through the criminal process, forced to testify against the defendant. The government received their conviction, which is what they wanted. And the thing is that they ran for the hills. Okay, I don't want to help this particular victim anymore. Okay? Well, I explained to him, I said, well, look, the statute says has in the past. Okay? Now, I also had one where the defendant actually died. So the prosecution was going on, defendant died, and I told him, I said, well, it doesn't say you have to have a conviction here. It says helpful in a criminal investigation or prosecution. So my client was helpful, even though you didn't get a conviction. Or maybe it could be a case where maybe there's a statute of limitations. Maybe the statute of limitations ran on the criminal case. Well, my client still showed up, still provided information, and was actually still helpful. Now, it's up to you, the DA's office, or whoever is responsible for prosecuting. But my client still was brave, stepped forward, and actually gave the information that you needed. Substantial physical or mental abuse, and then unlike the T, the 918B certification form is required, right? Now this is also, I want to do a call out to some of the judges too. This is who a certifying agencies can be. Now some of you might not be aware of this authority or power that you actually have, okay? So it's a federal, state, or local law enforcement agency, a prosecutor, judge, or other authority. Now I think this might also possibly include the Harris County County Attorney's Office maybe. But I had another case where the prosecution, actually it's the same case, the prosecution finished with the case and the case was over. Now the thing is that they didn't want to sign off on my form. And I called the sheriff's department and they're like, well, we'll sign off on it only if it's within 90 days of the offense. Now this was a 9-year-old girl who had been raped by mom's boyfriend, and it took her about 3 years to report. So I told him, I said, well, look, my 90 days was busted, but how's a 9-year-old girl supposed to go to the sheriff's office before she's realized she's actually been raped, right? And say, please sign off on this form so I can stay. So what I actually did is that I looked at this statute and I called the judge, or not necessarily the judge, but actually called the judge's campaign manager, who just so happened to be a lawyer. And I said, look, I'm over here in Houston. I have a victim. You can pull this court record. The defendant pled guilty in front of your judge. There's the plea colloquy. Can you please ask the judge basically to sign off on the form? And basically, this is a power that the judge didn't know she had. And basically, sure enough, the judge signed off on the form and basically sent it back, and we got the case approved. There's also a 6-month rule. So if those of you who are seeking the U visas, what winds up happening is that it has to be signed within 6 months of actually filing. So for some of you lawyers, it might take you a little while to put these cases together. Now, once you file, if the 6 months busted, fortunately, I've had some of the other DA's office, I've actually gone back and they've re-signed them again, but be wary of that 6-month deadline. There's family members. I think Naomi and some of the others had talked about family, a little bit ethics. Remember, this could be actually a sibling. So maybe you're representing a sibling, but how do you identify that your sibling client wasn't really the victim, but maybe someone else was the victim in the family? Put it in your intake form. Ask them, are you a victim of crime? Maybe not, but maybe your family members have been. This is also the beauty of this particular visa. There's also some U benefits. The removal proceedings can also be stayed. They can also be terminated, okay? And they can also be held in abeyance. Now, I also had one with a criminal proceeding where I had a young lady, as a result of the trafficking, had illegally procured a U.S. passport. Now, for those immigration lawyers out there, it's a death knell, right? But what wound up happening is that the client went from criminal defendant to victim after submitting the affidavit to the prosecutors. And they actually agreed she was really a victim and everything was cleared. So defendant to victim to lawful status. Thank you all.
Hi, my name is Michelle Permenter, and I'm with the Harris County District Attorney's Office. I'm actually the certifying official for the DA's office. Fortunately, I have someone that I also utilize a lot. She's shaking her head, but I'm going to do it. Her name is Deborah Shield. She's actually the coordinator for U visas. So back several years ago when we initially started doing this, my introduction to certification was basically, well, it's not that, we don't have that many, and that was in 2008. Well, I'm not sure what happened, but between 2008 and now, it skyrocketed. So with that said, there was a period of time where I was really struggling to keep up, and being able to have a position where somebody is actually reviewing those particular types of cases on a regular and consistent basis, or requests, I should say, has been extremely helpful, not only to me, but to the office in general, and also those who are actually submitting the requests for the certification. There's just a couple of things I actually will talk about. Primarily, why do we provide a certification? I think that's already been touched on. I think that's already been discussed. However, one of the main things is that obviously through the prosecution's eyes, it's actually the identifying and prosecute criminals. But I also like to look at it in the respects of that we're looking at a community where we have undocumented immigrants, and we want to make sure that they understand that the laws that are here for those of us who are citizens are also here for those who are not, and making sure that they don't have any fear of coming forward and reporting, and making sure that they know that they're going to be treated with respect and compassion and all of those things, dignity, just like any other crime victim that we're working with on a regular basis. So encouraging the reporting of crime, a lot of times we're dealing with situations where there is the fear. There's the fear of what's being told to them if it's a domestic violence case, and we want to make sure that we overcome the obstacles for the cooperation. Our division is the Victim Witness Division, so we're a liaison between the prosecutor and the victim. So when we come into contact with a complainant, the main thing is building the rapport, and if you don't have the rapport, sometimes that can be challenging to continue with the prosecution of the case. You may lose your complainant. You may not have the confidence that you want them to have in regards to what you're doing on their behalf. So one of the things is to create that cooperation, and that's to build that rapport, to develop that rapport, talk to them, let them know that you're there for them, and also that there are these opportunities for them if they're not aware. And also the humanitarian relief as well. The one thing that we will normally not do in our division is that we're not going to automatically bring up the U visa. Do we have brochures? Absolutely. Do we give information on immigration law? Absolutely. Do we have information on nonprofits? Absolutely. If someone comes right out and says, you know, I am not documented, then we will say, well, this is what I would recommend you do. You might want to go down the road and talk to. Or we have people that come in all the time that have actually hired an attorney, and then the attorney tells them, well, you need to go and you need to make sure you get A, B, and C. That's really not how I see that working. So I think it's important for them to understand that there is there are resources out there that can help them, and that they are not deceived by people that are just wanting to take money. What obstacles are faced in obtaining law enforcement certification? I could probably spend a long time talking about this, but I'm not going to bore you with all of that. There are many obstacles. I would like to think that the DA's office, we try not to create them. We're looking to actually certify. However, we do actually have a policy, probably one of the many agencies that say that they have a policy. Some people say that they have a policy, but it's a secret policy. Some people say that they have a policy, but we'll get back with you on that. And I'm not exaggerating. So it just depends on agencies. I think for the most part in the Houston and Harris County area, I think that we have a good working relationship with Houston Police Department, Harris County Sheriff's Office. Anytime I've called any agency, and there are a lot of them, as you all probably well know, I can't say anything that has been challenging. Or if there was anything, I don't think this would probably be where I would want to say that. That's a funny. No, I'm serious. Harris County is a wonderful place to work, and I think one of the most positive areas in working towards the certification process. There are challenges, and I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. I think a lot of it is education, sharing. I think sometimes when you get the legal minds involved a lot of times, thank you, that it can become very challenging because a lot of times things are made a lot more difficult than I think sometimes they should be, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is that there are misperceptions, there are misunderstandings, and so if we can all have a dialogue about certain things and talk about those things and communicate about those things that might be challenging, I think then we have a much better chance of making this area and the Harris County area very easy for the certification process. Harris County District Attorney's Office, this is our policy. The policy is one that we will review any requests that come through on pending cases or any requests that come through on cases that up to 3 years post-disposition. So basically at this point, if you have a case pending, it might be that the certification's automatically signed. I think it's challenging sometimes because a lot of times people think, well, we're going to send in the certification and the person's cooperating and we need a signature. It just doesn't work that way. The way it does work is that we verify everything. So if it is a disposed case, it's not pending, we're requesting the file, we're reviewing the file, we're reading every bit of information that we can find within that file. Because somebody pleads guilty does not mean that somebody had cooperated. So that's important to take note of. A lot of times you have people that will say, I don't want to pursue charges, and we still end up with a conviction. So with that said, that probably would be denied because there's a lack of cooperation there. Not necessarily in the sense if somebody's talking to us and they've done everything that we've asked, most of the time it's going to be a certification. But really, at the end of the day, it's a case-by-case review. And so we're not going to do a blanket answer on any of the cases, and we try to take the time and give certainly the dedication to all of these that we think is important, because we think that we need to be very careful as we move forward, but we also want to make sure that we're doing a very diligent and efficient job in the reviews. And I suspect that's all that I have at this point in time. So if, are we questions? And Kristen will answer all the questions for you. Thank you.
We do have time for questions. I think there in the audience there's some mics, so the panel saved a few minutes. So do we have any questions? Anybody? This is your opportunity. John? Mics? Where's the mics? Here's one.
This is a question, Ms. Permenter. How did the 3-year post-disposition policy get put in place when the Immigration and Nationality Act does not impose any time limits on the possibility of getting a U visa certified? I mean, you can have it, under the Act, you can have a conviction as old as 20 years and still should conceivably be able to get a U visa certified, but why in Harris County that's not the case?
Can you hear me? Kristen said she'd answer that question. No. Here's how correct. It's a very broad statute. And so in the beginning, we were very broad. And so anything that came in was reviewed. But what I think is a lot of times misunderstood is that when you're going back so far, there's a lot of things that we don't have on file. There's a lot of things we can't confirm. There's a lot of things that we're not, if upon reviewing a request and it cannot be determined that this person was helpful, or I can't prove that they weren't, if I'm not able to prove that they were, there won't be a certification. I think that that's something that I'm fairly consistent across the board with what we do. And the other part of that is that the number of requests that would come in, and we would be inundated and bogged down by the number. And we ultimately looked at it, and it's not an easy decision. There's never an easy decision when it comes down to something like this. Ultimately, in the federal government, that statute, they made it so broad that it also is sometimes challenging to identify certain things. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing, but when you're that broad and you don't narrow a little bit, it can be challenging across the board for everyone. And I think that's why there's a lot of misunderstandings and misperceptions throughout law enforcement or any agencies, because really giving direction is sometimes hard to find. So through discussions, that's how we came to. I mean, at one point, the policy was only pending cases and no disposed cases. And I think that looking at pending and also giving that amount of time afterwards, I think that's fair, and I think that's compromise.
Other questions? Here, right?
Can I ask a question? Judge Garcia and I are both sitting Supreme Court judges. Sometimes we get Class C family violence cases where it's supposed to stay here and we give a protective order. According to what Professor showed earlier in the statute,
judge. Okay, and I guess
I'm saying, is the protective order that we sign off on that protects the spouse and minor children who may not be, in your visa, is that good enough for y'all? I mean, we're just municipal court. We're the lowest, Judge Rodriguez. We're all JP court judges or city court.
That's a great question, and the law is clear that what matters for purposes of qualifying for a U visa is the act that happened. If it was an act of domestic violence and you can prove that it met the state law to constitute domestic violence, it doesn't matter whether the perpetrator was criminally prosecuted or whether there was how law enforcement identified, if they coined it as a terroristic threat or an act of physical violence. As long as the victim can show that she cooperated in the investigation or prosecution of the crime, including obtaining a protective order, she might qualify for a T visa if she can, or U visa, excuse me, if she can show the other requirements that Professor Q discussed.
Once again, the city prosecutor can go for certification. That's what this attorney's office, correct? May not go to Class D or where it stays Class C. So I can tell the city prosecutors, you need to check this out when you do that.
Definitely, definitely.
All right, thank you.
There was a question down here in front.
Could you quickly touch on the stays of deportation pertaining to U visas? How common is it? How rare is it? And how is it practically used? Because when someone's in deportation, particularly in detained cases, things happen very quickly. I know it's a little outside of the scope, but could you expound on those stays of the deportation regarding U visas?
Well, I guess you can have different stages, right? So you can have a client that's already been ordered removed, and the client that's already been ordered removed under the statute, you can actually ask for a stay of deportation based on the fact that the individual might be prima facie eligible for either the U or the T. Now, I guess if the person hasn't been removed yet and the cases are pending, all you have to do is show prima facie eligibility. And the government trial attorney can actually file a joint motion with you to ask for termination of the proceedings or even administrative closure of the proceedings while we're waiting for CIS in Vermont to adjudicate it.
And locally, we've had some success in getting cases closed where the person has a prima facie determination letter showing that they're prima facie eligible for a U visa, but sometimes the government won't terminate or close the case until after USCIS grants the U visa application, and so the removal proceedings continue until they actually have the U non-immigrant status as practiced here.
Okay, any other questions? Got a minute or two. Yes, right over here.
How long does an attorney trying to help these children have to get all this done?
That's a great question, especially when you're talking about kids who are really traumatized, who've been through horrible crimes. It makes it more difficult to even elicit the information that you need from them to help them cooperate with law enforcement. I think time is of the essence when you're talking about the unaccompanied minors and the helping them apply for relief. But, I mean, I don't know. Good question.
If you don't mind, I want to make a point too, is that we're talking about all these children that are actually being detained at the border. We also need to tell ourselves that some of them have already made it through. So the thing is that the ones that have made it through might have not been on the government's radar, so you might have time to do those U and T visas or whatever else you have to do, right? But the ones that are actually in proceedings, you're right, the time is ticking.
But when you take U and T visa cases pro bono, Catholic Charities, we certainly work collaboratively with you and the DA's office and law enforcement to help you get the certifications you need to help move forward quickly in helping the kids apply for the relief for which they qualify for. So I think there's lots of people, although there is a lot of information and that you need to get, and time is of the essence. There's lots of people who are a part of the process of helping you get the information and the certifications.
Okay, I want to, if the audience will join me in thanking our panelists, thank you very much. Okay, our next topic, let's see, Dalia Castillo Granados. Okay. This topic, as she will explain, is really not only do you need to have an immigration law background, but also family law in some ways. So I'm pleased to speaking on special immigrant juvenile status is Dalia Castillo Granados, staff attorney with KIND, that's Kids in Need of Defense. Dalia?
I'm not sure anybody can see me behind this podium. All right, so I am a staff attorney at Kids in Need of Defense, KIND. We are a national organization that was started in 2009, and we have 8 offices throughout the United States. And we were formed by Microsoft and Angelina Jolie in response to the many unaccompanied minors that did not have attorneys representing them in immigration court. And so there was a gap in services, and our group was formed. For the most part, we have a model of finding, recruiting, training, and mentoring pro bono attorneys, but we also do some direct legal representation. So today I'm going to talk about special immigrant juvenile status, which I think by far is the most common type of relief available for unaccompanied minors. And just to be clear, not all unaccompanied minors will qualify for special immigrant juvenile status, and not all children who qualify for special immigrant juvenile status are going to be unaccompanied minors. Are going to be these kids that go through the system and are apprehended by immigration officials at the border and go through ORR and are released to family members. Some children have been here for many years. They could have been identified by CPS or other legal service providers, and they may also qualify for special immigrant juvenile status. I have a PowerPoint. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. We'll just wait a minute. There we go. Okay. So we're going to cover in about 20 minutes the history of special immigrant juvenile status. We're going to talk a little bit about the federal statute and regulations. That's a little bit flipped. We're going to talk about the 3-step process to obtain special immigrant juvenile status, to obtain this type of humanitarian-based immigration relief for children. We're going to go through some scenarios, some of the cases that we see often in our office. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about ethical considerations when you're representing child clients. All right, so special immigrant juvenile status has actually been around for about 24 years. It was enacted by Congress in 1990, and it was meant to address children that were found in the state foster care system, and it was meant to be able to obtain some sort of legal status for these children that went through state foster care systems. We wanted to be able to have some sort of status for them by the time that they came out of the system, so that they can continue with their lives and work and become citizens of their communities. In 1994, there was a technical correction to the statute. The original statute, what it required was that a child be found eligible for long-term foster care. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means and where the definition can be found in the regulations in a minute. But in 1994, a child didn't have to just be found dependent on the court, which is what the original statute had in its language, but also could be legally committed to or placed under the custody of an agency or Department of State. In 1998 is when there was added language into the statute that a child not only had to be found eligible for long-term foster care, but had to be found eligible for long-term foster care due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. And then finally, the most expansive changes to the Special Juvenile Status Statute came in 2008 with the TVPRA, which Naomi already talked about, and it greatly expanded the relief to encompass also children who could show that reunification wasn't viable with one or both parents due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. This definitely expanded the statute to qualify many more children that would have been found eligible before. All right, so the eligibility requirements for special immigrant juvenile status, and some of these can be found in the regulations, are that the child be unmarried, be under the age of 21, that a court have declared that child dependent on the court, or legally committed to or placed under the custody of an individual or entity, and then also these two very important required findings, which are first, that reunification is not viable with one or both parents due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect, and then secondly, that it is not in the best interest of the child to return to their home country. And both of these must be found by a state court. And I think, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but this is what Chief Justice Hecht was referring to when he said children are not only going through immigration court system, but some will be found in the state court system, because these children have to go through state court proceedings in order to get these findings so that they can then go to Immigration and Citizenship and Immigration Services to petition for special immigrant juvenile status. All right, so the federal statute can be found in the Immigration and Nationality Act, and it has the same requirements that we just talked about, greatly expanding. So, something that you have to remember, that even though this statute started out being for children that were found in state foster care, now that language is no longer part of the statute. It has been totally wiped out, and instead of long-term foster care being in the statute, now what you see is reunification not being viable with one or both parents due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Now, the federal regulations were written in 1993. That was before the 1994 correction, before the added abuse, abandonment, or neglect language in 1998, and before the 2008 expansion. So they're very outdated. The Department of Homeland Security proposed new regulations in September of 2011. They gave advocates a chance to comment on those regulations, and 3 years later, we don't have regulations. So we're still waiting for those to be finalized and published. There are some provisions in the regulations which you can find at 8 CFR that are still helpful. For example, the definition of a juvenile court is helpful. It's in the regulations. It defines a juvenile court as a court located in the U.S. having jurisdiction under state law to make judicial determinations about the care and custody of juveniles. And it also lists some of those other eligibility requirements that we were talking about before, the child having to be unmarried and under 21. But it also, in the regulations, has that language about long-term foster care, and you can just ignore it because the 2008 TVPRA changed the statute, and that is no longer part of the statute. So we tend to think of SIJS as a three-step process. you first have to go to state court and get that state court order making those required findings, and then you petition for special immigrant juvenile status with Citizenship and Immigration Services, and then finally you can apply for lawful permanent resident status. The child can obtain a green card. Step one is probably by far the most complicated and time-consuming part of this whole process. Congress didn't really give us an idea of what type of state court proceeding they meant when obtaining these required findings, and so there's many vehicles that can be used to obtain these findings. The most common way that we get into state court in Texas is by using a suit affecting parent-child relationship, a SAPSR. This is a custody proceeding that determines custody rights. The goal of the SAPSR is to determine and clarify custody rights, and then also to get these required findings in order to apply for special immigrant juvenile status. So the state court must first declare that the child is either dependent on the court, and that can be through maybe child protection proceedings or delinquency proceedings, and then or it can declare a child legally committed to or placed under the custody of an individual. And so you can use the custody proceedings that we were just talking about, a SAPSR, or possibly, potentially, guardianship proceedings as well. The first very, very important finding that the state court has to make is that reunification is not viable with one or both parents due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. And you look to the Texas Family Code for the definitions of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. For the most part, the adult petitioner's testimony or sometimes a child's statement would be enough for the judge to make this finding. And then secondly, the state court must find that it would not be in the child's best interest to return to their home country. This is something that state court judges may feel uncomfortable with, but it's important to remember that this is a best interest determination. Family law judges make best interest determinations as to children all the time. The judge is not making a finding about whether or not the child can remain in the U.S. That's in step 2, that's in step 3. Immigration officials and the immigration judge are the ones that decide that. The state court judge, in making this best interest determination, can consider things like country conditions, the family members that would be available to care for the child if he were returned to his home country, or any other factors that would endanger or negatively impact the health of a child. If you are able to get through step 1, obtain that state court order, making those 2 very important required findings, then you should pat yourself on the back, because that is definitely the hardest part of the special immigrant juvenile status case. Step 2 is to petition for special immigrant juvenile status. That is an application. It's a form I-360 that you fill out with the child and submit to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is the agency under the Department of Homeland Security that adjudicates most applications, and they're the ones that are going to adjudicate whether or not the child has met the eligibility requirements for special immigrant juvenile status. The application is mailed to a national lockbox, and then the application is then routed to a local office where a local officer will schedule an appointment to meet with the child, go over the application, verify the biographical information, and decide whether or not this child meets the eligibility requirements for special immigrant juvenile status. And that is that the child is under 21, unmarried, and has a valid state court order. Something to remember is that if, for example, you obtain these required findings through a custody suit and the family court will lose jurisdiction once the child turns 18, because that's when a child becomes an adult under Texas law, then make sure that you file that petition prior to the child being 18, prior to the state court losing jurisdiction. Make sure that that state court order is valid at the time of filing. If you obtain special immigrant juvenile status for the child, then you can move on to step 3. This is the application for lawful permanent residence for the green card. This can be done if the child is in removal proceedings. Sometimes the Office of Chief Counsel will agree to dismiss the charges against the child in removal proceedings so that the child can apply with USCIS for the lawful permanent resident status. And other times, for different reasons, maybe the chief counsel doesn't agree that the charges should be dismissed, or you have a timeline and you think you would go faster in immigration court, then you would do it in front of the immigration judge. So either way, if you're applying with Citizenship and Immigration Services because the child's case has been closed in immigration court, or you're applying with the immigration judge because removal proceedings are continuing, you would still fill out the same form, Form I-485. And you're basically trying to show that the child is admissible to the United States, that he does not meet one of the grounds of inadmissibility that would prohibit him from becoming a permanent resident. There are some provisions of the inadmissibility grounds that a child, that a special immigrant juvenile status child doesn't have to worry about. For example, if he entered without inspection, if he came in without permission, that ground of inadmissibility doesn't apply. If the child perhaps can be deemed a public charge, he needs public assistance, that would not be a ground of inadmissibility. Some other types of inadmissibility grounds, such as criminal charges, you have to look at more carefully because there may be a waiver for that or not. The child may be out of luck and not be able to adjust their status. If they're approved, then they become a lawful permanent resident. They get a green card. They're able to live permanently in the United States. They're able to work. They're able to travel. And in 5 years' time, if they're 18, then they can also become a U.S. citizen if they meet those requirements. So some of the cases that we see often in our office are like these of Jose and Tanya. Jose is a 16-year-old boy from Honduras. Jose and his mother suffered terrible abuse at the hands of his father in his home country. And the mother, because of this abuse, fled to the United States, decided to come, get away from the abuse, better able provide for the child, and left the child with his grandparents. So when the child, and this happened many years ago, so when the child becomes a teenager, he decides he wants to reunite with his mother. He wants to come to the U.S. and be with her, and also he wants to get away from the continuing abuse by the father because he still lives in the same town. And so he comes to the U.S., he's apprehended, he goes through RR, and then he's released to his mother and comes to our office. So he might be eligible for special immigrant juvenile status. We would file a custody suit on behalf of the mother. And so the mother could gain sole managing conservatorship over the child and also get those required findings for the child. And then there's a case of Tanya. She's a 13-year-old girl from Guatemala who was recently reunited with her aunt in the U.S. Her father had been killed in a land dispute a couple of years back, and the mother turned to alcohol, was not taking care of the child. The child was begging on the streets in order to have enough food to eat. And when the aunt found out about this, brought her to the United States. So in this case, the aunt might be able to get custody of the child or possibly do a guardianship proceeding and get those required findings in order for the child to qualify for special immigrant juvenile status. Some ethical considerations, something that comes up often with these cases, because there are kind of these three parts. That first part being that you have to get into state court, and sometimes you're doing a custody suit, is that you might be representing an adult when it comes to the custody suit, and then also representing a child when it comes to removal proceedings. So something we always advise our pro bonos is to make sure to have a contract with both the adult, make sure that that is clear, that you're representing them only in custody. I thought I had 3 more minutes. All right, so thank you so much. And you can come up to me afterward if you have any questions.
Just want to take over the microphone and say thank you very much. We're called in. No, that's right. That's not the wrong side. If the panel for 4 o'clock would make their way to the stage, please. Panel for 4 o'clock, the resources available group. We're going to have a panel discussion here. As you're doing that, let me make 2 or 3 points to you. Number one, if you again turn the agenda over on the back side, particularly as it applies, if you'll consider listening to this panel discussion. For volunteer opportunities, please return your completed volunteer sign-up sheet to a seminar attendant in the lobby. If you don't have a volunteer sign-up sheet, we have those out front for you. Very important, volunteer, and these people will be talking to you about volunteer opportunities. Number 2, particularly picking up on the special immigrant status, juvenile status. As I mentioned earlier, and it'll be posted on the website when we were in Austin on Friday, we obtained some papers that have been sent out to the judges about this status and the law that is there, so you will have that available to you that's been sent to the courts. I'm not going to put her on the spot, but I'd email back and forth. Associate Judge Angela Ellis. Judge Ellis, are you here? Thank you very much for making it. Appreciate that. And again, I'm not asking you unless you want to speak on it, but as I understand, from talking with the Chief Justice, when he has alluded to earlier, that there has been a spike in these types of filings in the family and juvenile courts. Is that correct? Right. So that is the area particularly, again, it will be described on the forms where you go into state court, either the family courts or one of our 3 juvenile courts. And as you can see, particularly if you do CPS work, the quote, best interest test is something that those courts deal with all the time. If you would look at your program, the agenda number 4, we have a very fine panel discussion. I'm going to sit up here with them to ground guide them if necessary. And as you'll see, the topic 4 to 440, resources available. You've seen all these statutes. You've heard the discussion of it. So often it's come up, and at the press conference earlier, how many children, and if we have a number that 60,000 have made it across the border since October of last year, then the filter rate of how many to Harris County, you will get an insight, number 1, on that, I believe, from this panel, and number 2, you will listen to what your volunteer opportunities are now. As Benny said, we had this as a, quote, preparedness. It's kind of like build it and they will come, that you just have to anticipate with a county of this size that there is a likelihood that there will be a situation where children need to be represented. Our panel, very distinguished, and you see the names here. Ms. Maldonado is a supervising attorney with Catholic Charities. Brian Schaefer is with us from the YMCA. Elisa Gomez is with the volunteer lawyers in one of our sponsoring organization, attended the meetings of volunteer lawyer program. Professor Beck is here with us, and also Ann Chandler back, giving you back some of your time earlier, talk about resources. I'll leave it to you as how y'all want to structure the time and talk for the next 40 minutes. What can now these attorneys do? What are the opportunities to volunteer? Who wants to start it off?
I'll start off. Good afternoon, and I want to thank
And
everyone.
pull the mic up so they can hear you at the back of the room, and also so it can get taped.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for being here today. The thing that I'm going to be speaking about first is the services provided by Catholic Charities to unaccompanied minors. What Catholic Charities does is provide legal services to all of the unaccompanied minors in ORR care at the local shelters. There's in the greater Houston area. With the first thing we do with them is we go to the shelter and we provide them a Know Your Rights presentation. The Know Your Rights presentation consists of explaining to the children why they're there, the immigration removal proceedings process, what to expect in court, how to behave in court, who the people that they'll see in court are, such as the judge, the interpreter, the judge's clerk. We speak to the children about their rights that they have while they're at the shelter, as well as the rights that they'll have once they are reunified with family members. We want to focus that because, as was explained earlier, there's possibilities of U visas and T visas, and we want to let the children know that they have a right to be safe, to be protected, that if anyone hurts them, then they should go to the authorities and they shouldn't be afraid to go to the authorities. Lastly, we explain to the kids the types of immigration relief that are available to them. After the Know Your Rights presentation, each child receives an individual legal screening with one of our staff attorneys. During this process, it's like if a client were to go to your office for a legal consultation and then you try to determine whether they qualify for relief or not. If they qualify for relief, we explain to them what relief that is and the application process in as simple terms as they can understand. As you've seen today, some of these processes are very complicated, so we have to simplify it for them because they are children. Now, after that, if they don't have legal relief, then we also explain to them the options of voluntary departure, what the process is, the consequences for failing to appear in court, and the consequences for taking voluntary departure and failing to leave after having been granted voluntary departure. After that, the children remain in the shelter, and sometimes they'll get reunified before they have to go to their first immigration court hearing. If that happens, then what we do, if they have legal relief, we try to find a legal service provider in their area. So there might be a child in a shelter here in Houston, and they're going to get reunified with family members in New York. So we try to find someone in New York that might be able to take their case. Sometimes we can't find an agency that can take it, and we, at a minimum, provide them with the list of other legal service providers in their area. If the child is still in the shelter when they have their first hearing, then we go with them to court as friend of the court. We try to help them ask for a continuance, and there's some cases in which we will provide direct representation. For example, if the child says that they want to request voluntary departure at that point, then we will represent them directly. There's other cases in which we also provide direct representation and look for pro bono attorneys to assist with the cases of these detained kids. On one of the other programs we have is providing legal services for kids that are reunified in the greater Houston area. So many of these kids that are at the local shelters are going to remain in Houston, and we begin working on their case since the point that they're at the shelter and assisting them, whether it's apply for special immigrant juvenile status, asylum, U visas, T visas, whatever the case may be. Once they're reunified, they come into the office, they come in with their sponsors. We explain everything to the sponsor, and if they want us to continue with the case, we will. And again, we look for placement with pro bono attorneys for these cases, particularly in special immigrant juvenile status cases, because if we're going to represent the child, then we need somebody to represent the sponsor in obtaining the predicate order with the state court. We also have a program that's called the LOPC, or Legal Orientation Program for Custodians. What this program does is provide the same information that the children are receiving at the shelters in the Know Your Rights, but it's geared to towards the sponsors that these children are going to be reunified with. It speaks to them what their obligations and duties are going to be as the sponsors. Sometimes the sponsors attend these orientations before they receive the children into their care, and sometimes they receive the orientations after the child has been in their care already. I did want to go back to someone asked, how soon are you expected to do these cases? Cases vary in the amount of time. What we do have right now is these children are getting set for their first immigration court hearing within 21 days. This is just a policy that went into effect within the last 2 weeks or so. So that doesn't mean you have to be done with the case in 21 days. That just means that's when the first hearing is going to be, and then the judge is setting them out accordingly depending on the case and, you know, what the attorney tells the judge, what applications they're going to submit. Catholic Charities also has a wide array of other services. One of the programs that we also have is fingerprinting. What we do with the fingerprinting department, there's many times that before the child can be reunified with one of the sponsors, they need to have their fingerprints done. ORR wants to make sure that these children are going to go to a safe placement and that they're not going to fall into the hands of traffickers. So a lot of times the sponsors will have to go through these background checks so they can go for fingerprintings at Catholic Charities. As part of the fingerprinting department, what they also help with is the reunification packets. When someone wants to sponsor a child, they have to complete paperwork. The paperwork is generally in English. Sometimes these sponsors don't have a very high educational level or can't read, so we at Catholic Charities provide them with assistance with doing that. We also have counseling department that could provide counseling services to the children or the sponsors. It's a lot of times difficult for the families to have a child when they didn't have a child for many years with them, so it's integrating the family back together and getting them to be a family once again. Lastly, I want to say that we are going to have, I know that this seems very intimidating, it's a lot of information, but anytime you take a case with us, we mentor you every step of the way. We have a pro bono coordinator that will sit with you, meet with you, give you templates, explain to you if you have questions. We're always available to answer questions. Sometimes we'll even go with you to court if needed. So you won't be abandoned. There'll be someone there helping you. We are going to have a CLE that we're hosting. It's going to be at South Texas College of Law on August 15th, and the Hispanic Bar Association is sponsoring it with us. What we're going to do is going to speak more in detail of all of the types of relief, but after each section, go through, this is the form you fill out, this is how you fill it out, this is where it goes, this is where you mail it to, so that you'll feel more comfortable with what you're doing and you'll be more comfortable accepting these cases. We do have cases that are ready to be placed with pro bono attorneys. After the CLE is over at 5, I, along with some of my staff, some of my coworkers from Catholic Charities, will be outside at the front table with some pro bono summaries if you're ready to start on one of the cases. And I'll pass it along to Janet.
We all work, we all know each other, all the nonprofits, and I can tell you that, you know, Catholic Charities does great work, so does the Y. Anyway, what I want to talk about is a couple of things. One, so does Ann. Who did I forget? Kind. Oh, Kind. 3 women over there. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about U of H, then I want to tell you about a task force that we have in Houston to coordinate all this, and then I want to encourage you, as Amy did, and give you a little bit more idea of like what the time frame would be if you do take a case. First of all, U of H, we've got 4 attorneys and we supervise law students, so we have a dual mission. One is teach the law students how to be attorneys. In the immigration clinic, it's immigration attorneys. We work with the civil clinic because they do the family part for us on the special immigrant juveniles. And so all the students go to court, all the students stand in front of the judge, we stand behind them. You see some ex-alums from the clinic here today. Armando is in the clinic now. So anyway, so we've had a case at the Supreme Court, we had a case at the Fifth Circuit, we've had a Board of Immigration Appeals decision, all after people lose in their removal hearings. Those cases have impacted, you know, thousands of people, so we're happy to be part of that. We have crime victims, asylum, human trafficking, and all, you name it, we do it. We like to take the complicated cases. We don't like a plain vanilla citizenship case, even though it's nice sometimes for a student. Nothing is plain vanilla for a student. If you remember when you were a student, everything is confusing. But we like to take the more complicated cases and leave to everybody else the less complicated cases. Second, I want to talk to you about the task force. This is the American Immigration Lawyer Houston UAC, Unaccompanied Alien Children Task Force. So we're all on the task force here. Alyssa has been working with us from HVL, and she'll talk about her part. What we've tried to do is, first we thought we were going to have to recruit attorneys. But after we heard that 175 attorneys signed up in 24 hours for this CLE, and today we have 500, we're not really worried about that anymore. So now what we're worried about is mentors. So we're all trying to get mentors because we don't want anybody to take a case without a mentor. If you're a family attorney, you know how to go to family court. Maybe you need a phone call with a mentor, maybe two, just to say, okay, but this is the, you've been to family court a million times, but this is the special immigrant juvenile part, or this is a declaratory judgment. So you may need very little on that end. So you might be going to family court, and then you might not be doing part two, the immigration part. If the judge grants the order that you need from the family court, you might not be going to USCIS in a hurry. So you might have time. Only if your child's going to turn 18, then you have to hurry. So you have time between step one and step two. Then, as Amy pointed out, between the time you get the petition approved by USCIS, you go to an interview with your child. It's pretty much a slam dunk. If you get the family order, CIS is probably going to approve the petition. Then you're going to go back to court. You could be back to court in 2016. So it's not like you have to do everything all at once. I just wanted to encourage you about that. Also, if you don't speak Spanish, since most of these kids are coming from Spanish-speaking countries, the State Bar has a program called Language Line, which works pretty well. So if you're a non-Spanish speaker, you call on the telephone, and while you're in the room with the client, the interpreter gets on the line and interprets for you. So that's a great service from the State Bar. I don't know what else I can say to encourage you. We're overwhelmed. When the immigration attorneys found out that all of you had signed up for this, we just couldn't believe it. We were so ecstatic. So we hope that you will volunteer for a case, and as Amy said, all of us offer mentorship. Kind, Tahireh, Catholic Charities, YMCA International, and we're happy to help you. It may be a phone call or two, or it may be more hands-on. I can tell you one last thing. I've been as an observer in criminal court, and I regard that as, that's a very busy place. People are walking around and doing stuff and everything. I went to family court on a suit affecting the parent-child relationship one time, and that also is a very busy court. Immigration court is smaller, and I know my time's up. Immigration court is smaller, more personal, and a little bit easier to handle. Thanks.
My name is Brian Schaefer. I'm from YMCA International Services. Give you a little bit background about our program. To start off, we really don't specialize in providing services to children. This rush of children has kind of affected other parts of our program, and that's why I think it's really important to have mentors and pro bono attorneys to make sure that this doesn't affect every other type of immigration program. Because, for instance, we don't take children's cases, but every Wednesday we do a walk-in clinic. Yesterday we saw 89 people, 22 were children. And we don't, at this time, that's why we're trying to work in this task force, we don't really have any place for those children to go. When they make their way to us, it's usually because they've been to the other people. And so that's 22 kids every Wednesday that don't have help. And so that's why pro bonos are really, really important. A little bit about our program. We specialize, we do a lot of adult detained work. We do a lot of asylum work. So in mentorship on any type of asylum issue, we can help tremendously. We do all other types of immigration cases, and we tend to take complicated cases as well. So when there's other issues, we can provide mentorship on inadmissibility issues or other issues that may come up in your case. But when it comes to just, the family court stuff for juvenile SIJ stuff, I'm not your guy. Nobody at our office is, and that's why we need help. Because, really, we always say if kids could get that, with family attorneys helping out, we could help, we can handle the rest. But it's that part, it's not our specialty, it's not our expertise. If we try to help all these children, it's going to affect tons of other people, other types of immigrants who aren't going to get help because we're trying to do something that's not our expertise. We do a lot of adult detained work. The other thing that comes up that we do see are children who get moved from youth detention to adult detention, and they still need representation. Unfortunately, a lot of times those kids, for lack of a better word, age out of representation. No one's really there to help them. So it's really sad to see a kid who was in youth detention get transferred to adult detention, and maybe they had some type of relief, but there's not enough funds or enough people to help. So, that's another area of the law that we could use a lot of help in. The other thing that we do at the YMCA, which is not in the legal department, but we have social workers who do a lot of post-release studies for children who are being released from OOR from other parts of the country. That's really a great need because they get here and maybe they don't have the family court order stuff, but all of the stuff that Catholic Charities done has been done by a different organization somewhere else in the country. And they know they need help, but again, back to what I was saying originally, there's nobody here to help them. And because of different priorities, a lot of times those kids, it's really sad when somebody knows they need help and there's help available. There's help that could be done, but there's really not the resources there to help. So that's why pro bono is really important. And once this task force gets going, we really could, as Janet was saying, mentors and family attorneys who can do the family court thing is really, really important. So that's it.
So I'm Ann Chandler again with this Tahirih Justice Center. And our mission at the Tahirih Justice Center is to protect immigrant women and girls who are fleeing areas of violence such as domestic violence, child abuse, female genital mutilation, honor killing, forced marriages, and other types of harms that are really systematically seen across the world. When it comes to the unaccompanied children, we represent them and are, of course, seeing really an escalating number of these kids requesting services. And like Amy at Catholic Charities, we come with cases, of course, for interested volunteer attorneys. Our pro bono program involves one of partnering with your law firm. So if you're interested, our model is to partner with your law firm and then work with you within the framework of your law firm, just in case your circumstances change and you move on, or that you feel like pulling on a couple of other attorneys at different times may be helpful, because these cases can sometimes, if you've heard a little bit about our immigration court backlog and the need for us to hire more immigration judges, can sometimes be drawn out over time, and thus it helps to have that relationship with our law firm. Of course, if you're a solo practitioner, by no means do I want to discourage you to do this work. It is completely possible to you to really make an incredible change in the livelihood of a child. And our immigration courts are very flexible in giving you the time you need, granting you continuances if you need on your case, and if your circumstances changes, substituting you for another counsel. And thus look forward to working with you as a mentor on cases that involve gender violence.
Okay, thanks, Ann. My name's Alyssa Rubin Gomez. I'm the executive director at Houston Volunteer Lawyers. We are a service of the Houston Bar Association, and why on earth are we here? Houston Volunteer Lawyers doesn't do immigration work, not directly, but we, in fact, do intake for virtually every other kind of civil legal need for the low-income population in our community. But as part of the Bar Association, we want to encourage you to do pro bono work of any flavor, whether it be cases that we intake or immigration cases like the crisis we're facing now. And we are really here to help foster our community of nonprofits and to help the emerging issues like this one. We have great relationships with all of these organizations, and again, our strength really is to bring resources to the table, including lots of lawyers that we know as part of the Bar Association. And this is one indication. I think we should all very much thank the Harris County Attorney's Office for putting this on and for involving us in all of these critical organizations. How can we help you get involved? So one of the things Houston Volunteer Lawyers is committed to do for the unaccompanied children's crisis is to try to keep our finger on the pulse and stay on top of what's happening in the legal community, since we're on the ground in it most of the time with our colleagues here. On the tables outside when you leave, there are brochures about Houston Volunteer Lawyers. The reason I tell you to pick one up is because in the center here is the address to our online volunteer portal that in about 30 seconds I'm going to show you a very quick glimpse of. Our portal is extremely easy to access. It's only accessible if you have a valid bar license, and so it's not really to the whole public. It's really for you. It's designed for attorneys. We can play with it and change it at the drop of a hat. And so as things are coming up, we're going to be posting it on our portal. So we have already posted, and I'll show you very briefly, links to how to get pro bono opportunities with each of these organizations, upcoming CLEs in addition to today's, a link to the Harris County Attorney's Office, which will have all of the materials for today. So kind of a one-stop shop for Houston pro bono legal work, and we're happy to serve in that capacity. So let me take 30 seconds and show you, keep you from falling asleep in the last hour.
You're assuming it comes up.
Right here. This laptop's been here the whole time just waiting. It's reminding me there's a CLE today that I should have done. Our portal is at portal.makejusticehappen.org. It's pretty easy to remember, and in fact, if you go to our website at makejusticehappen.org, you can link to the portal. Come on. No internet access. That's not really going to help us. It says we're on. If we're not really connected, I'm just going to talk you through it really quickly. But this is the login page. In order to register, you come down here to the bottom. If you've taken a case with us in the past, you click one particular link. If you've never been through Houston Volunteer Lawyers, formerly known as HVLP, and you're new to volunteering, click here. We ask you to submit your information and bar number, and then you will get an email from one of our staff members with how to create a username and password. The key is to sort of wait for that step. We're validating that you have a valid bar license because we actually don't like people to take cases from us who aren't actually licensed, which happens. We prevent it, but people do try. So just be patient. We're really very quick. We get back to you within just a few hours. And if you have any difficulty with this website, this link right here, Michael Hoffrichter, who's sitting right over there and is the master creator of this whole thing, we'll get back to you very quickly too. We have an e-newsletter that goes out every week, and we're going to be keeping up with these sorts of events as they unfold, and we'll be keeping you abreast of that. You can sign up for that here or outside on the table. We have a paper registration. I have no idea how to make this connect, so sorry that I can't show you, but once you're in, it's basically, oh look, maybe. While we're waiting, there it is. I have to agree to some terms apparently. While we're waiting, I just wanted to tell you briefly that I am not an immigration lawyer. My background was commercial litigation by trade before I got into the nonprofit world, and I took a special immigrant juvenile case and have taken 3 in my career. And I just want to tell you that you can absolutely do it. I'm not a family lawyer. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I've succeeded in all 3 cases. And in terms of time, I took a case in 2010 that has a hearing next March to finish up. So I know they're moving more quickly now, but not to despair. It's actually probably my longest running case. So thank you. I really encourage you to do it. It's extraordinarily rewarding to do these kind of cases. So here, 2 seconds. Sorry this took so long. Once you have a login and password, if you can enter your password. Our volunteer portal, so under here, searching waiting cases, those are Houston Volunteer Lawyers cases. Definitely encourage you to peruse those too. But down here, we have this whole section on the front page. If you're interested in helping with unaccompanied children on immigration issues, here are ways to get involved. And there are links to pro bono opportunities through Catholic Charities, the CLE trainings that I know the task force has put together that are coming up, I think, once a month through the end of the year. You can get in touch with Kids in Need of Defense. The Texas State Bar has a whole host of resources, and the Harris County Attorney's Office, the CLE material isn't up yet, but as soon as it is, we have a link to it. So consider this as an option for finding out how to proceed after today, and we just encourage you to do pro bono of any kind. Thanks.
According to my watch, we have a few minutes. Questions, anyone? We have 2 people with mics. Can't see the hands going up. I guess that shows the timeliness of the hour. Question over here on my left. You're right. Yes, sir.
I don't know if I need a mic. What about consent for medical treatment for these unaccompanied alien children, especially the boy and sponsor? You know, who can provide that?
Who can provide a consent for medical treatment for UAC?
That's the look we have too.
They're under the care of ORR. So while they're in ORR is the one that's consenting for their treatment.
They have 72 hours before they go to ORR? Is that right?
Well, that's the longest it should take. It should be, sometimes it's sooner, but yes, it can be up to 72 hours before they get to ORR and to shelters. You're welcome.
I see another hand, another question. Hand go up. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait,
And I
I'm
have the
sorry.
mic,
Cut
so
off
I'm
to
not
my
gonna
left,
let go
your
of
right.
it.
Question?
You're not pointing at me, but I have the mic.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to stand up and ask my question.
Good, yeah, please.
I contacted Catholic Charities about a month ago and asked if I could help and was told you didn't need me because I didn't speak Spanish. So I'm curious, what's up with that?
I'm sorry they told you that. We will take anyone.
That's okay, I found Kind, so I've got a case from them. But I just wanted to ask if you guys have any suggestions, because there's a lot of people in here who don't speak Spanish. And do you have any support or, I've found myself a translator, but I'm just curious about if there's anything in place to help with that.
I'm sorry that happened to you. We will make sure that doesn't happen again. We take anybody that's willing to volunteer. You do not need you do not need to speak Spanish. There's the Language Access Program and several other programs that we have that we can use to assist with interpretation. One of the other things, there's a lot of people that are hearing about the unaccompanied minors issues that are going on in the news, and they're calling Catholic Charities saying they want to volunteer, but they might not be attorneys. So if they have language skills, we're trying to match them up with attorneys that maybe don't have the language skills. That way everyone has an opportunity to assist.
By the way, the language access line, which all of our organizations have access to, is a 1-800 number that could not be easier. You enter it, you have your client in your office on the speakerphone, and it makes the language barrier virtually non-existent. And then they provide document translation and in-court interpreters, but in immigration court, you don't even need that. That's provided by the court.
And it's also not limited just to Spanish. It's any type of immigration case. So whether it's a child that speaks a different language or you're amazed at the languages they can access. Really rare African dialects, they can find an interpreter on the line, so it is a really good resource.
The other thing I'll say about that is they also do written translations. So if you need a birth certificate translated, you can send it to Language Line. So that's through the State Bar.
What can you not do with technology? God, incredible. Any other questions? The panel. Yes, sir, over here to my right, Judge Fraga.
Just out of curiosity's sake, school started August 25th. Who's got the authority to start school? They're in our jurisdiction. They don't attend school. They're going to start getting the fair to attend school stuff. Who's doing that? Because I'll see those kind of JP courts and city courts will see those type of tickets probably by the 1st of October. So who's got the authority to enroll these young people? They're in our jurisdiction.
That's a great question, and I happened to be on a panel last night at Neighborhood Centers with the representative of the Houston Independent School District, so if I could just repeat what I heard. So these, in Texas, everybody, regardless of immigration status, has a right to free legal education. And Houston Independent School District is working diligently with schools to allow the kids to register and ensure that everything from vaccination to enrollment is in place. With that said, there are going to be glitches. The type of paperwork that a child receives when they leave the care of Office of Refugee Resettlement, as an attorney, I have a hard time making sense of it. It's like verification letters and this and that, and issues of kind of, custody are fairly unclear. So it is very understanding that school administrators are not going to know who this person is who is signing up the child to attend that school. So Houston Independent School District is working to ensure that at registration, these children are able to smoothly enroll. There are going to be glitches. For sure, and while Houston Volunteer Lawyers does not necessarily practice immigration law, these kids are going to have legal needs that stretch beyond immigration law, from family law needs to issues with enrollment to health care, and thus get on that portal, check out Houston Volunteer Lawyers cases, because you're going to see a myriad of needs from the population.
Let me pick up on that.
If I didn't answer the question, let me know. The suit affecting parent-child relationship, these orders are critical not just for immigration benefit, but for the benefits of ensuring that these kids can smoothly transition in our community, from enrolling smoothly in school to getting on health care plans of the managing conservators, and for ensuring adequate medical consent and other care.
And I would add one more thing to sponsors that participate in our LOPC program. If they're having trouble registering their child for school, that's one of the things that the LOPC program can assist them with.
I put her on the spot, I guess. I'd love to be a judge. Is the president of the Houston Independent School District, who was sitting on the floor recently because of the chairs, Juliet, you still here? I put you on the spot. Would you like to comment on what y'all are doing at HISD? We talked about it on the phone in terms of the comments made about, particularly the judge said, if you heard the question of the judge.
How did I do?
The question the judge had, Juliet, was in terms of going to school and the authorizations necessary, what is underway? You have to confirm or deny what Annie said.
Yeah. I'm going to move to the side over here.
This is the president of the school board of the HISD.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm kind of caught off guard. I'm on the spot, but I would like to say thank you, first of all, for being here and for putting this together. This is such an important issue. We know that at HISD, we comply with the state and federal law, especially Plyler versus Doe, and also FERPA, that maintains the confidentiality of our children. We are currently enrolling some students already from Central American countries, in particular campuses. They say the highest number of students are now coming into the Gulfton area and the Southwest area. There's students being enrolled at Newcomers and Liberty and Lee. We do not yet know all of the different elementary schools that the students are also going into. We've been collaborating with the federal government as well to look at the Terrell Middle School facility as a potential site to allow for accommodations for students or children that need a better setting and environment than what they're currently in. But to date, we have not yet reached an agreement, but we are hoping that Terrell Middle School will be used in the future as a site in the area for the students. And so we will make sure that all children that present to the Houston Independent School District will have an opportunity to have an excellent education. And we want to say thank you to everyone here for your commitment to children and to the city's future, and making sure that the rights and the well-being of children come first. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow. Question, answer. Go ahead with the question. We'll see who's got the answer.
I have a question that's related to all this, and probably some of you could have answered it, and especially you maybe would answer it. Do any of these children qualify? I know there's a whole set of rights that so-called homeless children have, and we encountered all of that with the Katrina children. Are these kids going to be under those provisions?
Typically, when children come and present to HISD, according to Plyler versus Doe, the status of the children is not going to be...
I recognize that when they've been placed with a relative or when they've been placed with a family member, but there's going to be a bunch of them that don't have relatives and family members, and I'm wondering...
Right. And I think the thing is, it's like in HISD right now, to have a specific answer to your question, I'm not quite sure how to say all the legal ramifications and the regulations that govern that particular area, but I will say that we are making sure that we will provide children with the opportunity to enroll in HISD, have an opportunity to learn, and we're doing what we can to also work with different organizations in the community. We've had meetings with TMO and Interfaith Ministries to talk about other supports and wraparound services that are available. Dr. Greer has talked about also trying to start up Saturday programs as well to assist the students get adjusted in understanding the HISD system as well. And one thing that I told Dr. Greer about, it's extraordinarily important to make sure that the children in these Saturday classes, as well as the campuses that they're going to, are going to have help with mental health and counseling as well, especially bilingual counseling services. And thankfully, through Catholic Charities and Interfaith Ministry, they're talking about trying to help us make sure that we have appropriate help in that respect as well.
And the timekeeper just called time on me, so thank you to the panel, and we'll move to the next part of the program. Thank you, Juliet, for great on-your-feet remarks. Next, if you look at your program, we could be down to the minute, role of the community. We were at one of these planning committee meetings, and Vidal Martinez, our next speaker, said, this CLE is all great, but we could potentially have a problem. So we put on here, Houston, we have a problem. Let me also say in that connection, in terms of the bigger picture, there was a news conference before this event, and County Attorney Vince Ryan was there, obviously, a number of other officials, the State Bar of Texas, Commissioner Specia was there, the sheriff was there, and at that time, Vince shared with the media, and I shared with Charles Foster also, who's the chairman of Interfaith Ministries, that the County Attorney Vince Ryan today sent a letter to the President and the Chief Executive Officer of Interfaith Ministries, basically requesting that Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston convene a meeting of Houston's faith community leadership to prepare for the possibility of providing emergency relief and services to unaccompanied children who may, as a part of their legal proceedings, be located in Harris County. So from the faith-based community, I feel from the conversations I've had over the last several weeks that that'll occur. I'll go to another point. I thought I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least somebody looked at, like Commissioner Jack Cagle. Was that Commissioner Cagle, Joe, that was there? Commissioner Cagle, you still with us? Thank you very much for being here. I know that County Judge Ed Emmett, Assistant former Judge Bill Henderson was here earlier. Bill, thank you for being here on behalf of Judge Emmett. Very distinguished lawyer, Vidal Martinez, very passionate about this subject. I won't go into his time. Vidal, Houston has a problem other than CLE. What can be done about it?
Thank you. Well, the first problem we talked about, they wanted to have this seminar in the jury room, the jury assembly room. And I told Vince, I said, you're going to have hundreds of people that are going to show up to this thing And nobody likes the jury assembly room in the first place, much less having to park downtown. So that's when we got this place here.
Thanks to the General Counsel
Yes.
for the Houston Community College.
I'm counsel to the chancellor. I'm not general counsel of the community college.
Bigger title than I've got. Go ahead.
Well, but Vince, thank you and your staff and the county attorney's office for doing this, the state bar, the Houston Bar Association, all of the charities and the social service agencies that are on there. I've been here 40 years practicing, almost 40 years practicing law, and have served with Charles Foster on the Greater Houston Partnership Board, and I was state bar chairman 1 year. That's a fun job, being the head of all lawyers in Texas. And but I've been on the business side, I've been on the philanthropy side, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective. And whatever your view is on immigration, whatever it is, whether the national government should do more or whether local governments should or can intervene, I leave that to the political arena. There's enough debate at every level on who or what is to blame for this crisis. But the fact is, the child immigrant crisis is a unique problem for Texas and particularly Houston. Statistics show that since October 2013, 70% of the child immigrants that have been apprehended are in the Texas Rio Grande Valley, 42,164 since last October. By comparison, the second place where immigrant children have been apprehended is Tucson, Arizona, with only 13% of the apprehensions that take place there. 98% of unaccompanied minors arriving at the border are from Honduras first at 28%, Mexico second, 25%, Guatemala 24%, and El Salvador 21%. So this breakdown represents a complete flip-flop from what it was prior to 2012, where Mexico alone accounted for 75%. Houston is center stage for this particular problem, and it has the largest Latino population between the two coasts of the United States. In Houston, we have close and historic cultural ties with Latin America, and many children now entering the U.S. are seeking to be reunited with family members or sponsors in the Houston area. Why here? Let's take a snapshot of who we are. Houston's about to be the third largest city in America, overtaking Chicago this decade. We are also the largest city in terms of square miles. We're 600 square miles. By comparison, Los Angeles is 468. We're the largest of all the top 10 cities in America. But what most people don't realize that in this city, we're also now the most culturally diverse city in America. If you go to the Houston area survey done by Stephen Kleinberg, Dr. Stephen Kleinberg from Rice, every year, just look up Houston area survey 2014 and read about our city. We have more denominations, we have more ethnicities than any city, more than New York, more than Los Angeles, right here in Houston, Texas. And each year, the dominant group of the growth for the last 30 years has been the Latino population. Most persons would tell you that San Antonio has the largest Latino population in Texas. Not so. If you look at whether you want to use whatever matrix you want to use, either population, metro, contiguous metro numbers, or SMSA data, Houston is number 3 in the nation behind Los Angeles and New York, and has over double the number of Latinos in San Antonio. We also are larger, we have a larger Latino community here than the entire Valley of Texas put together. What that means is that we have, here in Houston, we have either the first or the second largest communities in the nation from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. Exactly the places where these children are coming from, and they're coming here to Houston. So how does our community, which is at the front line of this influx, respond? Both the Pew Institute and the Public Religion Research Institute show that over 70% of Americans support shelter and support to child immigrants while figuring out whether they should stay in the United States. Then all opinions go everywhere on how do you handle that? This is part of that organizing process to handle that. For our own practical purposes, though, we need to separate the political issues from the local economic and social issues. The fact of the matter is we have 40,000 children inbound that are either at our doorstep or going to be here, and we need to take action. If we as a community do not begin to address this influx of children, then who's going to do it and when? When the lives of these children are at risk, we need to think of the human crisis. And for that, we have to accept the likelihood that most of these children are going to remain in the United States. In order to cope with this challenge, the private sector, philanthropy, and government must organize themselves so that they can contribute together to digest those that will be adjusted out of the immigration process by the good folks in this room. Houston has 26 Fortune 500 companies, second only to New York. Our gross metropolitan product is it's $308 billion. In perspective, that's bigger than Austria, bigger than the country of Israel, bigger than Singapore, bigger than Hong Kong. That's our local economy. We're also the largest medical center in the world. HISD that Juliet's running over there is the 8th largest school district. That's only one of 27 school districts in our whole area. There's no doubt that Houston has the infrastructure to absorb these children. And this isn't the first time historically the United States has been faced with this. In the early 1960s, we had the Pedro Pan, the Cubans coming to the United States. Some of those success stories are right here in Houston. Eduardo Aguirre was one of those kids that didn't speak English, went to New Orleans with the nuns, went to LSU, came here, was the head of Bank of America International for the world. Then he became the very first, this same non-speaking Pedro Pan child became the first Homeland Security Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and then followed by being appointed by President Bush as our ambassador to Spain. That was that child that came here, that didn't speak English, and came here under the same similar circumstances that are occurring right now. There are a lot of Eduardo Aguirre stories out there for our community. In terms of future outlook, we also need to accept that this problem will not be quickly resolved. As said before, there are push and pull factors that are influencing the decisions of children and their parents to migrate, and the United States has very little it can actually do about some of those issues. The persistence of gang violence in Central America will continue to push these children to leave, while the presence of family in the U.S. will continue to be a strong pull factor. One of the things we have to understand, this has become, as someone said earlier, a very big cash machine for the illegal trade of human trafficking, and part of it is funded by our own very communities sitting right here in Houston, Texas, that are sending money back to send people into this system. We got to find a way to do that. So the solution will involve people in this room getting these children in and through the immigration process first. And if you'll help get these children halfway, it'll then be up to the business, educational, philanthropic, health, and community sectors to take hold of this challenge, get these children adjusted out of the process, and then the community itself has to take over to achieve success in this area, regardless of the politics that are involved. Congress went home today. They did not get a bill. All right, you're going to read about that. There's still some middling talk about calling them back. It's not going to happen. They're gone for 5 weeks. They're not going to do anything. One of the interesting things, a congressman from Wyoming that has 577,000 people. That's the west side of Houston, okay? But he started attaching on the bill, that he wanted to have money for his state to take care of this illegal immigration problem. Really? Come on. We have to demand from our political leaders that we get a big chunk of whatever dollars are coming here, because we're the ones that are being affected. 70% of these kids are coming right through Texas. Yes, we have a problem, but we have to put ourselves together in a position to organize ourselves like we're doing here to get the children halfway through the process, and then it's going to be up to us, the business community and the philanthropic community, to pull them through and let them become successful members of this community. Thank you for your marvelous efforts to each one of you. I will just end saying that we are not Murrieta, California.
Thank you so much, Vidal. Closing remarks is just a thank you, thank you, thank you. Number one, first and foremost, you've heard it all day. Thank you all for being here and for what you are doing, what you have done, and more importantly, what you will do in the future. My boss is standing to my left. I'm going to turn the microphone over to him.
Well, John just said it, but let's also again thank John Odom and Terry O'Rourke. I don't know if Terry's still in the back. They came to us with this concept, this idea, and today I think showed, I don't know about everybody else in the audience, I've got a headache from all the material, but I've got a whole list of things I need to know more about. And our office, the Harris County Attorney's Office, will work with each and every one of you who's interested. We'll reach out to the other entities that are involved. We saw panelists today from a wide range of interests, wide range of organizations here in Houston, Harris County, Texas, and I think we've got, and Vidal, I think summarized it. There are a lot of things that have got to work in the same direction, but I think we're headed the right direction to be prepared to help these children. So thank you for being here today.